The smell hit me first, cloying, sweet, like rotten fruit left in a closed room for too long, but with an undercurrent of something metallic, something living and dead all at once. My hand, slick with nervous sweat, tightened on the grimy doorknob. It was cold, metallic, almost slick with something unseen. And despite the years of pushing through every kind of horror, a tremor ran up my arm. Inside, the silence was deeper than the grave, a suffocating vacuum that pressed in on my eardrums, echoing the hollow space where my sanity used to reside, a constant reminder of the things I'd lost, the people I'd failed. Then I saw it, not a body, not a struggle, not the immediate visceral horror I'd steeled myself for, but a single, pristine, white feather resting on the dusty floorboards, shimmering faintly in the moonlight, filtering through the grimy window. It looked impossibly delicate, almost absurdly out of place in this charnel house of an apartment, but the air around it felt heavy, saturated with a cold dread that clung to my skin like spiderwebs, raising gooseflesh on my arms. That feather, so innocuous, so fragile, was screaming, a silent testament to something that had no right to exist, a final, chilling punctuation mark on a story I never wanted to hear, a story that felt disturbingly familiar, like a nightmare I'd lived 1,000 times before, a direct echo of the smoke and screams that defined my earliest memories. It all started, as these things always do, with a simple request, or rather, a desperate plea from a woman who looked like she'd been living on nothing but caffeine and fear for weeks, her eyes wide and haunted, mirroring the shadows that seemed to follow me everywhere. I was just trying to get through another dreary night shift at the Starlight Motel, counting the minutes on my worn wristwatch, tracing the faded numerals with my thumb, when she walked in, clutching a sheaf of printed emails like they were the last will and testament of a dying world, laying her deepest fears bare for a cynical stranger. The Starlight Motel wasn't exactly 5-star, more like 1 star, if that star had been blown off course by a cosmic explosion and landed in a forgotten patch of highway dust, a perpetual purgatory of flickering light and transient misery. The kind of place where the neon sign outside, once proclaiming Starlight, now only managed to sputter out, Starlight, leaving the first syllable to the imagination. The ice machine was always broken, perpetually adorned with a handwritten, out-of-order sign, and the faint, sweet scent of desperation, of forgotten dreams and cheap cologne, hung in the air like an invisible shroud, a thin veil over the stale smell of disinfectant and disappointment. I'd picked up the night shift, easiest money, least human interaction, maximum solitude. Just me, the relentless, low hum of the fluorescent lights that made everything look sickly, and the occasional ghostly rumble of a semi hurtling past on the interstate, a brief tremor in the foundations, then silence again, perfect for someone trying to disappear, trying to forget that the world wasn't just a collection of bad roads and worse diners, but a vast, sprawling graveyard of shattered hopes and unseen horrors. My shift was dragging, a monotonous crawl that felt less like time passing and more like a slow, deliberate suffocation. The hands on my old analog wristwatch, a relic from a time before digital everything, inched forward with the glacial speed of a dying slug, each tick a reminder of another minute wasted, another minute closer to something I didn't want to face. 2 a.m., prime time for drifters, for lost souls seeking anonymous shelter, for the occasional couple whose hushed arguments echoed faintly through the thin walls. I was half dozing, my head propped on a fist, sketching aimlessly in my worn notebook. Just abstract shapes, jagged lines. Anything to keep the deeper, darker images from surfacing, to keep the memories of smoke and screams at bay. The pen scratched softly on the page, the only sound apart from my own steady breath. Then the bell jingled above the door, a sharp, unwelcome chime in the oppressive quiet. I flinched, my hand automatically going to the crown of my watch, my thumb tracing the cool metal, my eyes narrowing, already assessing, already bracing. My internal clock, always set to danger, nudged me, a cold, familiar finger on my spine. The woman who walked in looked like she'd been through a paper shredder, then dipped in dirty water and left to dry. Mid-50s, hair a tangled mess of gray and faded brown, eyes hollow and ringed with shadows that weren't just fatigue, but the deep, bruised purple of prolonged terror. She clutched a stack of papers to her chest, her knuckles white, bone white, like polished ivory. Her cheap floral dress was rumpled, clinging to her gaunt frame, and she smelled faintly of stale cigarettes and a desperation so profound it was almost palpable, a bitter tang in the air. My gut instinct, the one that had kept me alive for longer than I deserved, screamed, "Don't engage, Vance. Just check her in and move on. There's nothing for you here but pain and trouble." Hantuma, but then she looked at me, and there was something in her eyes, a raw, pleading vulnerability, a universal plea for understanding that scraped against that reluctant conscience I swore I'd buried years ago, deep under layers of cynicism and self-preservation. Damn it. Always, damn it. "Excuse me," she rasped, her voice thin and reedy, like dried leaves scraping across asphalt, a sound that grated on my already frayed nerves. Are you the manager?" "Night attendant," I corrected, my voice flat, devoid of any warmth I didn't possess. "Leo Vance, what can I do for you?" I kept my expression neutral, uninviting, my gaze sweeping over her, taking in the trembling hands, the way she kept glancing over her shoulder, a nervous tick that spoke volumes, as if expecting someone to follow her into the dusty, stale lobby. Hypervigilance. I knew it well. It was the mark of someone who'd been hunted, or was being hunted. The hairs on my arms prickled, a familiar warning. "My daughter," she began, her voice cracking, breaking like brittle glass. She sent me these emails." She held out the papers, her hands shaking so violently the pages rustled. They were printouts, slightly crumpled, edges softened from being handled too much, from desperate fingers clinging to a semblance of connection. "She hasn't contacted me in 2 weeks. The police, they say there's nothing suspicious." Her voice hitched, and a single fat tear, dark against her pallid skin, traced a path through the grime on her cheek, leaving a clean streak. "Am I going crazy?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken dread. My sigh was audible, a weary gust of air. Even to me, another civilian, another desperate plea. "Ma'am, I'm just here to check people in. I'm not..." I trailed off, my gaze snagged by the first page. The subject line was important. The sender was Bean. And the first line read, "Before I get into the details, I want you to know that what I'm about to share comes from a place of love and necessity." Love and necessity. Words people used when they were about to drop a bombshell or a lie. I'd heard them before, always followed by something ugly, something you wished you could unhear. This Bean character, whoever she was either a master manipulator or she was being manipulated. And given the context, I was betting on the latter. My gaze drifted to Clara, who sat hunched on the edge of the stool, staring at the floor, gnawing on her lower lip until it was raw. She wasn't looking for flakiness. She was looking for fear. And I knew fear. I'd worn it like a second skin for years. A constant, chilling embrace, ever since the Sycamore Grove incident, when the world had shown me its true face. A face twisted by smoke and impossible shadows, and whispered promises of a monstrous existence. The kind of fear that didn't fade, but simply settled deep in your bones. A cold, hard lump, waiting for the next trigger, the next sign that the thin veneer of normalcy was about to crack. This email, short as it was, felt like that first crack. I flipped to the second email. It was longer, dated the exact same day, a rapid-fire follow-up, as if Bean couldn't hold it in any longer. This was where the real story began, where the veil thinned and the monsters started to reveal themselves. Dear Mom, it's me again. These past few weeks have been a whirlwind, a blur of emotions and unexpected changes. I've been meaning to write, but every time I tried, something came up. A last-minute shift at work, a phone call from a friend in crisis, or just the exhaustion that comes from trying to keep everything together. Lately, though, I can't shake the feeling that something is hovering just beyond my reach, like a shadow in the corner of my vision. There's so much to tell you, but first up with the big news. Adam invited me on a trip to Hawaii, and I said yes. I've taken a leave from work, and while I don't know how long we'll be gone, I promise to visit as soon as I'm back. Hawaii. Right. People didn't just drop everything and fly to Hawaii on a whim unless they were escaping something awful or being pulled by something even worse. The shadow in the corner of my vision line made me pause, my breath catching in my throat. That was the first whisper of wrongness, the initial static on the line before the scream, the subtle shift in the air that only those who'd been close to the abyss could truly discern. I knew that feeling. It was the precursor, the premonition, the way the world seemed to hold its breath just before it decided to show its teeth, to tear away the flimsy curtain of reality. Before you get upset, hear me out. I know this might seem sudden or impulsive, but I've never felt so sure about someone in my life. These past few months have been a chaotic blur, and I didn't know how to tell you. But now that things are settling, I'm so excited for you to meet Adam. I know you'll think it's too soon, but Mom, I'm telling you, this guy's the one. He's everything I've been looking for and so much more. The "this guy's the one" part sent a cold shiver down my spine, tracing the path of 1,000 other terrors. The intensity of it, the almost desperate, fervent insistence. It wasn't the sound of a woman in love, not really. It was the sound of someone trying to convince themselves they were in love, trying to paper over cracks they knew were there, ignoring the chilling winds that blew through them. I'd seen that particular brand of self-deception before. It usually ended badly, very, very badly, often with a body count in the kind of existential dread that seeped into your soul. So, who is Adam? I met him at work. Well, not exactly. He was a customer. I remember the first time I saw him. He wasn't conventionally handsome, but his eyes, they had this intensity, like they could see straight through me, peeling back every layer to reveal secrets I hadn't even told myself. It was unnerving, but also magnetic, as though his gaze held the weight of countless stories yet untold. He ordered a caramel cold brew, half sweet, half ice. His voice was commanding, louder than necessary, but later he admitted he was nervous because he thought I was pretty. Funny, right? I was just as flustered. My breath hitched. His eyes, they had this intensity, like they could see straight through me, peeling back every layer to reveal secrets I hadn't even told myself. That was a red flag the size of Texas, waving furiously in a gale of warning. My own memories flickered, eyes that saw too much, eyes that promised something other than what they delivered, eyes that weren't quite human, but were unsettlingly more than human. I gripped the email harder, the flimsy paper threatening to tear under my tight hold. This wasn't about love, not for Adam. This was about something else entirely. Something ancient, something predatory. The caramel cold brew detail, the overly loud voice, the nervous admission, a practiced routine, a well-rehearsed act, a predator charming its prey, lulling it into a false sense of security with a performance that was just convincing enough. The exchange was typical. I made his drink, he paid, and left. But after he walked out, I felt this emptiness, like I'd missed an opportunity. It's hard to explain, but it felt like something clicked, like I'd just encountered someone important. The next day, he came back. When I greeted him with caramel cold brew, half sweet, half ice, his face lit up. "You remembered," he said, smiling with those perfect teeth. I felt my cheeks flush as I handed him his drink, and from that moment, everything changed. Perfect teeth. Of course, my mind supplied images of polished bone, unnaturally sharp canines, a smile that was too wide, too eager. I was getting ahead of myself, projecting my own personal gallery of horrors onto Bean's story, a reflex born of survival. But the pattern was undeniable, a quick, intense connection, an immediate, undeniable sense of profound significance. That's how they worked. They latched on, burrowed in, made you feel like you were the only person in the world who truly understood them, or who could understand them, making you feel special, chosen. And then they tightened their grip, slowly, imperceptibly, until you couldn't breathe. We started talking, just small things at first, but it felt so natural. Then one day, he noticed my screenplay. Turns out he'd seen me working on it at another cafe. "Did you follow me?" I teased, but my voice betrayed me, making it sound accusatory. He laughed it off, a smooth, easy sound, but I felt terrible. Despite my awkwardness, Adam kept coming back. "Did you follow me?" The seed of doubt, planted and then immediately dismissed by Bean, brushed aside by a laugh and her own manufactured guilt. Because he laughed it off, because he was charming, because she wanted to believe him. That was the trick, wasn't it? To make you question your own instincts, to make you feel bad for even having them, for daring to be suspicious. I'd fallen for it before, more than once. It was a well-worn playbook, an ancient set of rules. Only the names and faces changed. The ending, however, rarely did. It was always a dark, bloody mess. One night, after my shift, I went to my favorite writing spot. Imagine my surprise when I saw him there. Our eyes met, and we both smiled. We started chatting, and soon it became a ritual. I'd write, he'd read, and we'd talk. We became inseparable. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something different about him. Something different. Good for you, Bean. At least you saw something. Recognized the subtle disharmony in the perfect melody. Most people walked right past the cracks in the facade, never noticing the unnatural chill seeping out from behind the perfect smile, the scent of something alien in the air. The internal alarm bells, once they started ringing, were hard to quiet, but not impossible, especially when you wanted them to be. Adam had a way of knowing things about me, small details I hadn't shared. Once, he mentioned my favorite childhood song, a fact I hadn't spoken of in years. Another time, he guessed my mother's maiden name without hesitation. At first, I thought it was sweet, but soon, it felt eerie. At first, I thought it was sweet, but soon, it felt eerie. He'd finish my sentences, anticipate my thoughts. One night, as we walked home, I asked how he always knew what I was thinking. His reply sent chills down my spine. "Because I've been waiting for you, Bean, all this time." The repetition of, "At first, I thought it was sweet, but soon, it felt eerie," wasn't a typo. It was the echo of Bean's mind trying to reconcile what she wanted to believe with the undeniable, creeping dread. It was the frantic argument in her own head, the desperate plea for normalcy, and Adam's answer. "Because I've been waiting for you, Bean, all this time." That was it. The mask had slipped, just for a second, the hunter revealing his true intent, not a metaphor, a fact. He wasn't waiting in line for a coffee. He was waiting for her. The cold knot in my stomach tightened, turning into a lead weight. I felt the phantom brush of something unseen, the coldness of a gaze that knew too much, saw too much, and promised only oblivion. I glanced at Clara. She hadn't moved, her eyes still on the floor, but her shoulders were shaking now, a violent, uncontrollable tremor that vibrated through the cheap stool. I knew that tremble. It was the physical manifestation of a truth too terrible to accept, a primal scream caught in the throat. I laughed it off, but his words lingered. They felt heavy, almost ominous. He started showing up in unexpected places, claiming it was a coincidence. I wanted to believe him. I really did. He had this charm about him, this magnetism that made it hard to question anything he said. But there were moments, fleeting but unforgettable, where I caught glimpses of something darker in his eyes. The struggle, the push and pull between the rational mind and the magnetic pull of something ancient and terrible. I'd fought that battle countless times. Sometimes I won, bleeding and scarred. Mostly I just survived, carrying the ghosts of what I'd seen. The glimpses of something darker in his eyes was the most terrifying part. It meant she saw it, she acknowledged it, she knew deep down, but she didn't run. My hand went to my wristwatch, thumb stroking the worn metal, finding a small, grounding comfort in its familiar weight. Tick, tick, tick. Time was always running out, for everyone, and it felt like it was already long past midnight for Bean. Last night, something strange happened. I found a letter under my door. The hallway was silent, the kind of stillness that amplifies every creak and shadow, making you feel profoundly, chillingly alone. My hands trembled as I picked it up, the rough paper cool against my fingers, surprisingly heavy. For a moment, I hesitated, my heart racing, a frantic drum against my ribs, as if opening it might unleash something I wasn't ready to face, something more potent than words. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakably familiar, yet seeing it here, out of context, under her door, sent a fresh shiver down my spine. It wasn't addressed, but the handwriting was familiar. It read, "He's not who you think he is." An outside warning. Someone else knew. Someone else was trying to save her. A last, desperate attempt to pull her back from the edge. But by then, it was likely too late. The magnetic pull of something like Adam would be too strong, too deeply embedded in her psyche. The fear of being wrong, of being alone, of losing the one person who supposedly understood her, would outweigh the fear of the monster. A grim, familiar calculus. It was the story of every victim, played out in countless variations. I tried to confront Adam about it, but he just smiled and said, "Some people will do anything to keep us apart." His calmness unsettled me. How could he be so unbothered by something so bizarre? It made me question everything, yet I couldn't bring myself to walk away. The gaslighting, the dismissal, the effortless, casual manipulation. It was textbook. They always smiled. They always made you feel like you were the problem, like your perfectly valid fears were merely the result of paranoia or jealousy. And the victim, Bean, was so deep in it, so thoroughly enmeshed. She couldn't bring herself to walk away. Trapped. The invisible chains had already been forged. Now, as I write this, I'm preparing to leave with him. I've packed my bags, but my heart feels heavy. I want to trust him, but that letter, what if I'm making a mistake? What if Adam isn't who he claims to be? He's been so kind, so attentive, but there's an edge to him, something I can't quite put my finger on. The way he looks at me sometimes, it's like he's seeing something no one else can. Seeing something no one else can. He was seeing a meal, a plaything, a means to an end, not a person. The casual cruelty of that realization hit me hard, a cold, sharp stab. I'd seen that look before, in the eyes of things that wore human skin like a costume, that spoke with human tongues but held no human empathy. My mind flashed to a fleeting, chilling memory of a quiet, antique-filled room, and the horrifying truth lurking beneath polished surfaces. That kind of memory, once it surfaced, was hard to push back down, like a persistent phantom limmache. It felt like my own past, a parade of unspoken horrors, was rising up to meet me in this dingy motel lobby. "Mom, if you don't hear from me in the next month, enough time for me to return or send word, please call the police. Show them this letter. Tell them everything. I hope I'm wrong. I hope Adam is the man I believe he is. But if he's not, please don't blame yourself. None of this is your fault. You've always been my rock, my guiding light, and I'll hold on to that no matter what happens. I'm writing this not to worry you, but to make sure you have the truth, just in case. I love you, always. Yours forever, Bean. The final words, a desperate cry for help, disguised as a loving farewell. The tragic irony was, the police wouldn't believe it, not unless they saw it with their own eyes. And by then, it would be too late. They'd dismiss it as a runoff, a flight of fancy, another adult daughter escaping her overbearing mother, or perhaps a mental breakdown. And Clara would be left with nothing but these emails and a gaping hole where her daughter used to be, a wound that would never heal. I lowered the papers, the silence in the lobby suddenly thick, oppressive, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Clara was watching me, her breath held, her chest barely rising. Her hope was a fragile thing, a tiny, flickering candle flame, balanced on the thin edge of my reaction, my single word. "So?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, raw with exhaustion and terror. "Am I crazy, Mr. Vance, or do you see it too?" I looked at the emails again, at the words, at the carefully constructed narrative of a predator and its victim, at the desperate, doomed attempt to warn a loved one. I saw the shadow in the corner of my vision, the intensity in his eyes, the knowing of unspoken things, the chilling, "I've been waiting for you." And then the anonymous letter, the desperate plea, the final terrifying concession that she might be wrong. No, Clara wasn't crazy. She was terrified, and she had every right to be. This wasn't some dramatic overreaction to a new boyfriend. This was the blueprint for a nightmare. This was the same chilling cadence, the same escalating dread that had preceded so many other horrors I'd stumbled into. So many times I wished I could forget. A low growl, almost imperceptible, escaped my throat, a deep rumble of primal fear and weary anger. My cynical self, the one that usually ran the show, the part of me that craved nothing more than anonymity and quiet roads, was already packing its bags, urging me to hand the papers back, shrug, and tell her to get some sleep. "Sorry, ma'am, looks like a standard case of a new relationship. Nothing to see here." The night was long, the motel was quiet, and there were 1,000 other roads calling my name, promising forgetfulness, promising escape. This wasn't my fight. I didn't get involved. That was rule number 1, forged in the ashes of Sycamore Grove, cemented by years of running from things that shouldn't exist. But then I saw her face, the way her lower lip trembled, the raw, undiluted fear in her eyes. A fear so profound it was almost tangible, like the thick, choking smoke that had once filled my own childhood home, burning my lungs, searing my memories. And the reluctant conscience stirred, like a sleeping dragon woken by a distant scream, its scales rattling, its breath hot on my neck. It wasn't about heroism. It was about not being able to walk away from that level of agony, from that gut-wrenching despair. Not again. Not after everything. It felt like a sick, cosmic joke, the universe forcing my hand, dragging me back into the muck I'd tried so desperately to leave behind. "No, ma'am," I said, my voice rougher than I intended, gravelly with the effort of pushing past my own self-preservation. "You're not crazy." I folded the emails carefully, almost reverently, handing them back to her. My fingers brushed hers. They were icy cold, like something pulled from a freezer. "But this isn't good." "Not at all." Her eyes widened, a flicker of something that looked like hope, but was probably just a momentary surge of adrenaline, passed through the haze of terror. You believe me?" she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Doesn't matter what I believe," I said, pushing off the counter, my old leather jacket creaking, the familiar weight on my shoulders a small comfort. "What matters is what's happening, or what did happen. I walked around the counter, my movements fluid, purposeful, grabbing the keys to the motel's beat-up, unmarked white van from a hook on the wall. It was technically for deliveries and errands, a rusted, unreliable contraption, but right now it was the closest thing I had to a chariot of damnation. You said her name was Bean. What's her real name? And where does she live? Or, where did she live? Clara looked at me, a fresh tear tracking down her face. But this time it wasn't fear, it was relief, fragile and fleeting, the kind that came right before another wave of despair. Her name is Emily. Emily Vance. She lived in a small apartment complex across town, on Miller Street, apartment 3B. Emily Vance, my own last name. A coincidence? Or the universe's way of twisting the knife a little deeper, pulling me into a current I couldn't escape? I almost laughed, a dry, humorless sound that caught in my throat. This was exactly why I stayed on the move. Every road, every town, every desperate plea seemed to lead me back to the same kind of horror, the same kind of impossible, unnatural wrongness. It was a curse, an invisible tether pulling me into the darkest corners of the world, into the maw of things that defied explanation. "All right, Clara," I said, heading for the door, my heavy Maglite flashlight already in my hand, its cold metal familiar and reassuring. "Get some sleep, or try to, and if anyone asks, I'm just out doing a supply run. Don't tell them anything else. Not a word." My voice was low, urgent. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't want to see the hope, or the inevitable return of fear, in her eyes. The cold night air hit me like a physical slap as I stepped out of the motel lobby, the neon sign of the Starlight flickering behind me, casting sickly green light on the cracked asphalt, illuminating patches of oil and gravel. Miller Street, apartment 3B, another address, another horror waiting to unfold, and me, the reluctant, weary fool, walking right into it because a desperate woman's tears and a lifetime of past failures wouldn't let me turn away. My hand went to my watch again, checking the time that didn't matter. It was always too late, or just in time to witness something terrible. This time, I had a feeling it was the former. The scent of impending dread was already on the wind, a familiar perfume of ozone and decay, guiding me towards the next inevitable nightmare. The shriek tore through the drywall, a sound born of agony and something ancient, something that peeled back the thin veneer of normalcy. My hands were already at my old wristwatch, fingers tracing the cool metal, a nervous tic I'd cultivated over too many sleepless nights and too many close calls. This wasn't just a domestic squabble spiraling out of control. The glass splintered, not in the apartment across the hall, but inside her head. I saw the shadow, the impossible growth pushing through bone, felt the psychic crackle in the air, and witnessed the horrifying shift from terror to something far, far worse. It had all started, as these things always did, with a bad decision dressed up as a temporary job, a way to keep moving, to keep the past just out of reach. Another city, another dead-end night shift, another layer of grime on the soul. This time, it was a low-paying security gig for a dilapidated apartment complex on the outskirts of what passed for a thriving metropolis these days, the kind of place where the silence was always pregnant with unseen things, where the air hung heavy with the residue of countless lives lived in quiet desperation, and where the peeling paint felt less like neglect and more like an insidious disease. I'd taken the job because it was late nights, minimal interaction, and it paid cash. The perfect setup for a ghost like me. I remember my first round on the third floor, the scuff of my worn work boots on the stained carpet. The stale smell of disinfectant couldn't quite mask the lingering aroma of cheap microwave dinners in desperation. I was checking locks, making sure no enterprising junkie had found a new way into the laundry room, when I first heard them. Voices, a man and a woman, from apartment 3B. Arguments weren't unusual in places like this, par for the course. But these voices, even muffled by a few inches of plaster and a thin door, carried an unnatural edge. The woman's voice was too soft, too pleading, and the man's, a deep baritone, occasionally fractured into something else entirely. A low growl, a guttural snarl that raised the hairs on the back of my neck. I chalked it up to a bad temper, maybe a few too many beers, and kept moving. My job was to keep the residents from killing each other in the hallways, not to play marriage counselor through the walls. My conscience, a rusty, seldom used tool, remained stubbornly sheathed. A week passed. The late shift was mind-numbingly dull. My only companions were the flickering fluorescent lights in the hallways, the occasional squeak of a rat in the walls, and the ever-present low hum of the building's decaying infrastructure. I'd lean against the wall in a forgotten corner, scrolling through blurry photos of dilapidated motels on my phone, already planning my next escape. Just 2 more weeks, I told myself. Just enough to fill the gas tank and stock up on enough instant coffee to keep the world at bay for another 1,000 miles. Then I was gone, another city wiped clean from my internal map. But the voices from 3B continued their nightly ritual. Not every night, but enough for me to notice. Enough for me to subconsciously alter my patrol route. Lingering a little longer on the 3rd floor, my head tilted just so, trying to discern the nuances of the domestic drama unfolding within. It wasn't curiosity, not exactly. More like the hyper-vigilance of a veteran soldier hearing distant gunfire. You don't want to get involved, but you also need to know if it's coming your way. My watch, my old analog friend, seemed heavier those nights, its ticking a stark reminder of the slow, grinding march of time. One evening, I heard a crash. The sound of breaking glass, sharp and violent, sliced through the usual hum of the building. My stomach twisted. "Don't get involved, Vance. It's not your fight." My usual mantra. But then the woman's cry, a raw, choked sob, followed by a voice, the man's, that had completely lost its human cadence. It was deeper, rougher, like rocks grinding together, laced with a venom that wasn't just anger, it was hate. A primal, consuming hate that felt older than the building, older than the city, older than me. It reminded me, vaguely, of another sound I'd heard, a whisper in a snow-choked mountain pass. Too cold, too close, from a phantom that shouldn't have been there. A shiver, colder than any winter wind, traced a path down my spine. My reluctant conscience, that festering wound in my soul, chose that moment to act up. It screamed at me. Someone is in pain. Someone needs help. I hated that voice. I'd learned, the hard way, that helping rarely ended well for Leo Vance. It just meant more scars, more trauma to add to the growing pile in my head. But the scream, it was too much. It clawed at something deep inside me, something I usually kept buried under layers of cynicism and self-preservation. Maybe it was the memory of a past failure, a person I couldn't save, a fire I couldn't stop. The details were still fuzzy, locked behind a mental block, but the feeling lingered, a constant, dull ache of guilt. I found myself outside apartment 3B. My hand hovered over the door, knuckles brushing the cold metal of the handle. My heart hammered against my ribs, a drum solo of dread. The cheap wood of the door felt thin, fragile, barely a barrier. I could hear the man's voice, now a full-blown roar, punctuated by the woman's whimpers. "You think you're lonely?" he snarled, the voice somehow louder, clearer, despite the barrier. Then another crash, a heavier sound this time, something solid hitting a wall. "You know what, bitch?" My breath hitched. This wasn't just an argument, this was a demolition. And the voice, it was wrong. Too much bass, too much raw, unadulterated aggression. It wasn't just a man yelling. It was something else speaking through him. I'd seen it before, or something like it. Not like this, not exactly, but enough to know the chilling difference between human rage and something far, far worse, like the way Ethan's eyes had gone utterly dead before he started carving, or Olivia's unsettling stillness before her true nature unraveled. My internal monologue, usually so quick with a sarcastic quip, was silent, replaced by a cold dread that numbed my extremities. Your company is far from satisfying. What with your stupid goddamn rants about inequality, this injustice, that, the voice mocked, shifting now, strangely, into a patronizingly high-pitched, whining tone. It was a grotesque mimicry designed to inflict maximum psychological damage. You ever stop and think you're just making all that shit up? Or maybe things are the way they are for a reason, to keep you safe? Higher. My hand was still on the doorknob, but I didn't turn it. I couldn't. Not yet. I was a man who'd seen things that didn't fit into any sane worldview. But even I hesitated. This wasn't just a threat. It was a psychological attack, a dismantling of someone's reality. It felt intimate, violating. The woman's gasps were growing more frantic, choked, as if she were trying to hold back something enormous, something on the verge of erupting. Just how many times do I have to tell you this until it gets through your thick, fat skull? He is not your friend. The voice seethed, its words sharp as daggers, radiating a palpable sense of possession, of absolute control. All he wants from you is what every man wants from every woman, and what he wants is mine. That last word, mine, was delivered with a possessiveness that chilled me to the bone. And then, a new sound. A wet, sickening squelch. Not the sound of a fist, or a body hitting a wall. It was something internal, something organic, a sound that made my stomach lurch. And with it, a faint, nauseating odor began to seep from under the door. Not human waste, not garbage. Something older, like a cellar that had been locked for centuries, filled with damp earth and something that had rotted and festered beneath it. The smell of decay, of slow, creeping corruption. My hand flew to my mouth instinctively to ward off the stench. I heard the woman's muffled yelp of pain, sharp and immediate. What the fuck? Her voice, though still choked, had changed. It had a new edge, a new resonance. And then, the male voice, the demon's voice, colder, more clinical, even as it was laced with a cruel satisfaction. What the fuck is wrong with you? That was it. The line. My reluctant conscience, having dragged me this far, finally shoved me over the edge. No more. This was beyond domestic dispute. This was something inhuman, preying on the vulnerable, and my soul, as scarred as it was, couldn't stand by. I didn't care about the consequences, about the fresh trauma. I couldn't just walk away and let whatever that thing was finish its work. Not after all I'd seen, all I'd barely survived. I gripped the doorknob. It was cold, slimy almost, though I knew it was just my clammy hand. I twisted it. The lock clicked with surprising ease. The door swung inward on well-oiled hinges, revealing a scene that solidified every horror I had ever witnessed, every nightmare that had ever clawed its way from my subconscious into the waking world. The apartment was a wreck. A glass lay shattered against one wall, sparkling shards scattered like malevolent diamonds on the worn carpet. A framed photograph, likely of the couple, lay face down near the doorway, its glass cover splintered. The air was thick with the cloying, putrid scent I detected, now stronger, tinged with something metallic, coppery, blood, and there they were. Daniel, the man, stood by the far wall, his face a mask of shock, eyes wide, mouth agape, seemingly transfixed by the woman on the floor. She was huddled against the base of the sofa, knees pulled tight to her chest, trembling, but it wasn't just fear that racked her. Her hands were pressed against her forehead, and between her fingers, I could see two dark, gnarled protrusions, like black branches tearing through skin. They were horns, raw, bleeding, utterly impossible. And then I saw her fingernails, elongated, yellowed, morphing into wicked claws before my very eyes. Her eyes, fixed on her transformed hands, were no longer the soft, muted color I'd imagined. They were wide, vacant, and unsettlingly white. The man, Daniel, finally stirred, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Love, what's happened to you?" And then the woman, the victim, unleashed it. Her body convulsed, a wave of raw, burning rage washing over her. The sound that ripped from her throat was not human. It was a primordial shriek, a blaring, guttural roar that seemed to tear through the very fabric of reality. The framed photographs on the wall, already trembling, rattled violently, and one, already cracked, exploded outward, showering the room with splinters of glass. "What the fuck is wrong with me?" she screamed, her voice deepening, becoming monstrous, yet still laced with a horrifying anguish. Her entire skull seemed to contort, a fresh, sickening tearing sound accompanying the visible ripping of flesh around the base of the horns. What the fuck is wrong with me?" It was a revelation, delivered with the force of a physical blow. The demon hadn't just possessed Daniel, it had created one in her, or awakened it, or perhaps it had simply been transferred. The implications made my blood run cold. Daniel, the supposed host, the one who was supposed to be the monster, recoiled, stumbling backwards, genuine terror etched on his features. He was no longer possessed, he was just a man, witnessing the horrifying transformation of the woman he claimed to love. The woman's new monstrous face turned towards me, her eyes, those vacant white orbs, locking onto mine. A flicker of something ancient and terrible burned in their depths, something that recognized me, perhaps, as another vessel of trauma, another magnet for the darkness that permeated this world. I felt a cold surge of understanding, of shared fate. "Fuck you, you fucking fuck," she yelled, her voice a chorus of pure fury and deep, shattering pain. "Just shut up, please." And then, as suddenly as it had erupted, the rage in her seemed to coil back, the horns, still black and gnarled, twisted inward, seeming to retract, though the fresh wounds continued to ooze. Her claws seemed to shrink, her eyes flickered with a returning, agonizing humanity, still white, still vacant, but no longer radiating primal fury. She collapsed onto the floor, a heap of human misery. Daniel, cautious, almost hesitant, crept towards her, perching on the edge of the mattress. His voice was soft, almost soothing, a deceptive lullaby that made my stomach churn. "No, love, you aren't a monster. You are strong, but you are damaged." His eyes, however, held a flicker of something unreadable, something calculating beneath the veneer of concern. "It looks like you have a demon, too, probably put inside you by one of those guys with their bad intentions." He sighed, pushing her bangs back, a disturbingly intimate gesture. "It's fate, love, for us to be together. I will fix you, and I will protect you from the demon inside of you. I'm the only one who understands what it's like to have one, so only I can save you from it, save you from yourself." I stood there, frozen in the doorway, my go bag slung over my shoulder, my hand still gripping the cool metal of my wristwatch, turning the crown aimlessly. The stench of rot still hung heavy in the air. The shattered glass glittered, and the words, Daniel's words, echoed in the apartment, a twisted sermon of control and manipulation. My initial surge of reluctant conscience had propelled me here, had forced me to witness this sickening display. Now, it was replaced by something far more cynical, far more weary. This wasn't just a demonic possession. This was a psychological battlefield, a twisted form of abuse cloaked in supernatural horror. Daniel wasn't just a victim. He was a manipulator, perhaps a true monster, exploiting the very real demonic presence to further his control, to convince her that she was broken and only he could fix her. He had offered her a sick parody of salvation, chaining her to him with invisible binds, far stronger than any physical restraint. And she, the victim, was now just another link in the chain, another monster in the making. The realization settled heavy in my gut. My life, my curse, had led me to witness yet another horror, another facet of the endless darkness that clung to the edges of humanity. The things I'd seen on the road, the phantom hitchhiker, Ethan's depravity, Olivia's skin collection, they were all different notes in the same terrifying symphony. People turning into monsters, or revealing the monsters that had always been lurking beneath the skin. And often, it was the normal ones, the quiet ones, the ones offering love and protection, who were the most insidious. I didn't say a word. There was nothing to say. I'd seen enough. My job here wasn't to intervene, not truly. It was to witness, to observe, to add another layer to the trauma that defined my existence. My fatal flaw, my reluctant conscience had gotten me in, and now my instinct for survival, honed by years of running, was screaming at me to get out. My hand tightened on my watch, the cold metal a small anchor point in the churning chaos. I turned slowly, my boots crunching softly on the glass shards near the door. I didn't look back at them, at the broken woman and the smiling devil in human skin. The air in the hallway felt suddenly lighter, cleaner, though I knew it was an illusion. The stench of rot, the echo of the screams, the image of those black, gnarled horns erupting from a human skull, they were already etched onto the walls of my mind. Another permanent fixture in the Leo Vance Chronicles, just another ghost to keep me company on the lonely road ahead. I closed the door to apartment 3B, a quiet click that sealed away a fresh hell. My work shift wasn't over, but I knew I'd be gone by dawn. This city, like all the others, had just become too loud, too heavy, too much like home. Character count 9,876. The shattered glass exploded against something that wasn't skin, wasn't bone, not in any way I understood it. A sound, raw and primal, ripped through the air. Something less like a scream and more like the tearing of metal, a visceral agony that scraped against the inside of my skull. It bought me precious seconds, enough time to scramble, to hurl my body towards the window, the sharp kiss of jagged shards tearing at my skin as I burst through, desperate for anything but the stale, rotting breath of what had once worn my father's face. The night air hit me, cold and mercifully clean, but the scent of decay, of something profoundly wrong, clung to me, a phantom limb of horror. I ran blindly, the frantic thud of my own heart in my ears, the impossible sound of cracking joints and wet, tearing flesh echoing in the mausoleum of my memory, the only compass in a world that had just unraveled into a nightmare. That moment, a primal, desperate flight from an unimaginable horror, was the culmination of a day that began with an unsettling stillness, a quiet dread that seeped into the very bones of our house, hinting at the abyss that lay just beneath the veneer of ordinary life. It was 20 years ago, but the memory, sharp and unyielding, still dictates the rhythm of my breath, the twitch of my hand towards the worn leather of my jacket, the constant, low hum of paranoia that has become the soundtrack to my existence. The morning had dawned not with the usual optimistic stretch of light, but with a muted, bruised glow, as if the sun itself was hesitant to fully commit to the day. I was maybe 8 or 9, small enough that my legs swung freely beneath the kitchen table, but old enough to feel the cold, metallic tang in the air, a scent like ozone mixed with something acrid and sweet, a smell I'd come to associate with things that defy the natural order. The air was thick, heavy, pressing down on my chest, a physical weight that made it hard to draw a full breath. The usual symphony of chirping birds outside our suburban window was conspicuously absent, replaced by a silence so profound it felt like a vacuum, sucking all the normal sounds out of the world. Even the soft, rhythmic hum of the refrigerator, a comforting background noise on any other morning, now seemed unnervingly loud, a single mechanical pulse in a world gone mute. Every tick of the kitchen clock, typically ignored, grated on my nerves like fingernails on a chalkboard, each second stretching into an eternity, a slow, torturous countdown. Then he walked in. Dad, my old man, the anchor in a world that already felt wobbly on its axis. He was a big guy, broad-shouldered, a mechanic whose hands were permanently ingrained with grease and calluses. A man whose presence usually filled a room with a kind of sturdy, reassuring warmth. But not that morning. Not then. "Morning, kiddo," he rasped, his voice a gravelly whisper, drained of its usual booming vitality. It was as if some unseen dread had leached the very essence from him, leaving only an echo. The words hung in the air, heavy with a foreboding that sent a primal shiver, like ice water, slithering down my spine. I watched him move, an unnatural sluggishness in his usually robust stride, as he poured coffee into his favorite chipped blue ceramic mug. The steam, usually a comforting plume, curled upward like ghostly tendrils, dissolving into the heavy air. His face was pale, almost ashen, the lines around his eyes deeper than usual, shadows clinging to them as if he hadn't slept in days, or perhaps had seen something in his dreams that refused to release its grip. His shoulders were slumped, his posture defeated, as though he carried an invisible burden too heavy for even his strong frame. He sat across from me, not looking at me, but staring blankly through the window at the backyard, his gaze unfocused, distant. The sunlight outside, which should have been bright, seemed muted, hazy, as if the very day had lost its vibrancy, its definition, its will to be. "Dad, are you okay?" I asked, my voice small, thin, barely cutting through the oppressive silence that now felt like a living thing, a suffocating blanket woven from unease. I watched his eyes snap back to me, and for a fleeting, terrifying moment, I saw something flicker there, a raw, exposed fear, a desperate plea, a recognition of something profound and terrible. For a heartbeat, I thought he might actually tell me, that he might unload the invisible weight crushing him, allow me to share even a slee fraction of it. But then the moment passed, a shutter slamming down behind his eyes, and his expression hardened, solidifying into the familiar mask of stoicism he wore when things were difficult. "I'm fine. Eat your breakfast," he replied, his voice clipped, distant, an abrupt dismissal that stung like a slap. A surge of frustration warred with a cold, creeping fear in my gut. Part of me, the part that still believed in simple answers, wanted to press him, to demand to know what was going on, to break through his uncharacteristic reserve. But another, more ancient part, the one that instinctively recognized danger, whispered that doing so might unravel something I wasn't ready to face, something that might swallow us both whole. I clenched my fists under the table, my knuckles white, forcing the questions back down my throat, forcing myself to stay silent. The crunching of my cereal in the otherwise silent room sounded deafening, a monstrous noise in the quiet. The tension between us, thick and suffocating, stretched like a taut string, vibrating with an unspoken threat, ready to snap at any moment. Even the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall seemed slower now, each second dragging on with a deliberate, agonizing weight that set my teeth on edge. I picked at my food, the taste like ash in my mouth, the memory of his distant gaze chilling me far more than the cold air that permeated the house. I kept glancing at him, a nervous tick I'd carry into adulthood, a constant scanning for the wrongness in a situation, the subtle shift in a person's demeanor that signals the approach of something truly awful. Night descended, pulling a curtain of inky blackness over the already bruised day. I was drifting in that half-sleep state, somewhere between dreaming and waking, when a soft, almost imperceptible creak of the door roused me. My heart gave a startled thud, then began to pound, a frantic drum beat against my ribs. I sat up slowly, my breath catching in my throat, the shadows in my room seeming to deepen, to coil and shift, taking on monstrous, menacing forms in the dimness. My blood ran cold, a glacial current through my veins. When I saw the silhouette sitting at the edge of my bed, it was Dad, illuminated by the dim, flickering glow of the hallway light spilling through the cracked door. But he looked smaller, diminished somehow, his broad shoulders hunched, his head bowed as if under an unbearable, invisible burden. My analog wristwatch sat on my bedside table, its hands stuck at some forgotten time. But even then, I felt the phantom weight of it on my wrist, a nervous habit forming, a constant check on a time that always seemed to be running out. "Dad, what are you doing here?" I managed to whisper, my voice a shaky, reedy thing, barely audible above the frantic pulse in my ears. Confusion and a creeping sense of dread tightened their grip around my throat. My mind, young and unequipped for such things, raced with questions, each one more terrifying than the last. The shadows in the room seemed to press in closer, amplifying the unnatural stillness that had settled over everything. A silence so profound, it was no longer merely the absence of sound, but a malevolent presence. In his hands, I saw the dull gleam of metal, his gun, the one he kept locked in the safe, used only for hunting deer. Never brought inside the house like this. His fingers, usually so steady, were trembling slightly, a tremor that seemed to vibrate through the very air. His face was cast down, shrouded in shadows, but even in the dimness, the raw, aching sorrow etched into his features was unmistakable. The sight of him like that, broken and vulnerable, was jarring, a stark, painful contrast to the unshakable, unwavering man I had always known, the man who had always been my protector. "You know I love you, right?" he said softly, his voice cracking, each word laced with an ominous, chilling finality that made my stomach churn, bile rising in my throat. The vulnerability in his tone wasn't reassuring. It felt like a farewell, a goodbye cloaked in dread, sending a fresh shiver down my spine and planting a seed of pure terror deep within me. It felt like a confession, a penance. Chills ran through me, a freezing wave from the crown of my head to the soles of my feet. We weren't the kind of family to say things like that, not aloud. Love was understood, unspoken, a silent covenant. To voice it now felt like a desperate, last-ditch effort, a preparation for an ending. "Yeah, Anir, I know," I replied, my voice catching in my throat, thin and reedy, as an inexplicable unease tightened its grip on me. The air in the room felt colder, heavier, as if something unseen, something vast and malevolent, was closing in, pressing the very oxygen from the space. My pulse quickened, a frantic bird trapped in my chest, the silence between us stretching into an unbearable void, filled only by the faint creak of the floorboards beneath him, a sound that suddenly seemed monstrously loud. Then, a loud thud. It came from the living room, a jarring, sickening sound that shattered the fragile, dreadful moment. I flinched violently, my pulse skyrocketing, my body tensing, ready to spring. Dad's head snapped up, his movements quick, jerky, entirely unlike his normal self. His grip on the gun tightened until his knuckles turned white, stark against the dark metal. His jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscles jump in his cheek, and his eyes, wide and wild, darted towards the door as if expecting something to burst through it, to tear it from its hinges at any moment. "I should have known it had come back," he muttered, his voice low, guttural, filled with a bottomless dread that turned my blood to ice. He wasn't talking to me. He was talking to the shadows, to the unknown. What are you talking about?" I asked, a thin thread of panic weaving its way into my voice, which trembled uncontrollably. The room, already cold, seemed to drop another 10 degrees, the air growing frigid, biting. He knelt down suddenly, his movements stiff, almost mechanical. His large hand gripped my shoulder firmly, his fingers digging into my flesh. An echo of a warning from a past I couldn't yet recall. His dark eyes, usually warm and comforting, now locked onto mine with an intensity that made my chest tighten, a burning desperation that bordered on madness. "Promise me you'll stay in this room until you hear the front door open," he demanded, his voice shaking but resolute, carrying an ominous weight that made the room feel colder still, the air thick with unspoken threats. His words felt less like a request and more like a desperate, final command, a desperate plea from someone who already knew the unspeakable horrors that lurked just beyond the threshold, out of sight but not out of mind. "Why? What's out there?" I whispered, my stomach twisting in knots, a sickening coil of fear beginning to claw its way up my throat, choking me. "Promise me," he said again, his voice cracking, rising in intensity with each word, a raw, ragged sound of desperation. His grip on my shoulder tightened painfully, his nails digging in, leaving imprints I'd feel for days. His eyes, burning with a wild, haunted desperation, were wide, gleaming in the gloom, reflecting some unseen terror. It felt like he was fighting, physically fighting, to hold himself together, his words trembling with the colossal weight of an unspoken, unimaginable terror that loomed just beyond my young comprehension. He was saying goodbye, I realized even then, instinctively. He was giving me his last command, reluctantly, my mind numb with fear. I nodded. I was too overwhelmed, too terrified to argue, to do anything but obey. He stood, his movements slow, deliberate, each action a conscious effort, as if steeling himself for an unbearable ordeal, for what lay ahead. He leaned down, a gesture so uncharacteristic, so utterly out of place for my gruff father, and pressed a kiss to my forehead. His lips were cold, clammy, and the touch only deepened my unease. A final, chilling confirmation that this was no ordinary night. Without another word, without a backward glance, he turned and walked toward the door, his silhouette disappearing into the dimly lit hallway, swallowed by the oppressive darkness that now seemed to bleed from the very walls. "This ends tonight," he said, his voice flat, heavy with a chilling finality that echoed in the sudden, profound silence he left behind. The words hung in the air like a death knell. Sitting in the absolute dark, my body trembled uncontrollably, a fine tremor that shook me to my bones. Muffled crashes and guttural, inhuman roars echoed through the house, each sound sending a fresh jolt of terror through me, setting my teeth on edge. My imagination, vivid and cruel, conjured horrifying images beyond the thin wooden door, monstrous claws raking against the walls, leaving deep, jagged scars in the plaster, tearing through the very fabric of our home. In my mind's eye, shadowy figures with glowing, malevolent eyes lingered just beyond the threshold, their guttural growls vibrating through the silence, rattling the very foundations of the house. The sounds intensified, becoming more frantic, more violent, the distinct cracking of breaking furniture, the sickening, never wet thud of something heavy hitting the floor. Then came a sound that would forever be seared into my memory, a wet, sickening tear, a ripping sound that could only be flesh, followed by an unnerving, absolute silence that seemed to stretch on forever, a vast, empty void where noise should have been. My hands gripped the blanket tightly, my knuckles white, my whole body rigid with fear as I tried to steady my ragged, gasping breathing. The stench, that metallic, acrid smell, was growing stronger, seeping under the door, filling my small room. Moments later, or perhaps an eternity, time had ceased to have meaning. The handle of my bedroom door slowly, agonizingly, began to turn. My breath hitched, caught in my throat. The door creaked open with an agonizing slowness, revealing a silhouette illuminated by the faint hallway light, a figure dark and undefined against the bruised glow. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst, like it was trying to escape my chest. Was it Dad? Had he won? Had he made it? Hope, thin and fragile, flickered for a fraction of a second, quickly extinguished by the cold dread that remained. A car's headlights, passing on the street outside, briefly lit the room through the gap in the curtains, painting the walls with fleeting, ghostly light. Relief, potent and intoxicating, washed over me as I saw the familiar, dark blue of his uniform, the outline of his broad shoulders, until the figure dropped to all four with an unnatural, jerky, almost insectoid movement, and crawled into the corner of the room, as if trying to hide from the fleeting light. My chest tightened, a cold, hard knot of terror. Realization dawned. Brutal and unforgiving, this wasn't my dad. This was something else, something that wore his skin like a disguise. Shaking so violently I thought my teeth might shatter. I reached for the bedside lamp, my hand fumbling blindly in the dark. My fingers, numb with cold, finally closed around the cord, and with a desperate tug, the room was suddenly bathed in harsh, orange light. The air, already frigid, felt colder, sharper, as if the room itself had become hostile, a willing participant in the horror. The thing wore my dad's face like a grotesque, ill-fitting mask, stretched and distorted. Blood, dark and glistening, dripped down its neck in thick, viscous rivulets, staining the familiar blue fabric of his uniform. Its eyes, the windows to a soul that was no longer there, were hollow, sunken, inhuman, and glinted with a sickly, malevolent yellow hue that seemed to pierce straight through me. Seeing not a child, but prey, it tilted its head, a slow, deliberate movement that made its neck crack with a sound like dry branches snapping, studying me with a grotesque, unsettling curiosity, as if amused by my absolute terror, by the fragile, pathetic life trembling before it. It stood, slowly, its bones cracking and popping with wet, tearing sounds that defied all natural anatomy, sounds that curdled the blood in my veins. It lumbered closer, each step heavy, dragging, yet unnervingly swift. My instincts screamed at me to run, to scramble, to do anything but sit there, frozen and helpless. But my body betrayed me, locked in a paralysis of pure, unadulterated fear. Frozen in place, a rabbit caught in the gaze of a predator. I watched as it leaned in, its breath washing over me, reeking of decay, of something ancient and rotten, a smell like wet earth and spoiled meat. The sound of its shallow, wheezing breaths filled the small room, each exhale chilling me to the core, a cold, rasping whisper of death. Somehow, from somewhere deep inside, a tiny, desperate spark ignited. Perhaps it was that nascent, inconvenient conscience, the one that would plague me for decades, pulling me into dangers I should have avoided. Or perhaps it was just the sheer, animalistic terror. I found the strength to move. My hand, without conscious thought, grabbed the bedside lamp. With a raw, guttural cry that sounded alien even to my own ears, I swung it with all my might, a desperate, clumsy arc. The bulb shattered against its head with a dull crunch, spraying glass shards and sparking light. The creature let out another guttural screech, a sound so piercing, so utterly alien and devoid of anything human, that it made my ears ring, made my teeth ache. The momentary shock, the raw sound, was all I needed. I bolted, scrambling over the bed, kicking the blankets aside, throwing my small body towards the open window. The only escape, shards of glass, sharp and merciless, tore at my skin as I launched myself through the opening, desperate, and fell onto the dew-wet grass, running blindly into the shroud of the night. The forest swallowed me whole, a maw of deep, suffocating darkness. The trees, ancient and gnarled, twisted into grotesque shapes, their shadows seeming to shift and move with malevolent intent, morphing into forms that were almost human, almost recognizable, dissolving into the deeper gloom whenever I tried to focus, to truly see. Some seemed to slither like serpents through the undergrowth, their unseen bodies rustling in the dry leaves, while others lumbered with an eerie, stilted gait, just out of reach of my peripheral vision. Always there, always watching. Whisper, dry and brittle as dead leaves, carried on the wind, their words unintelligible but filled with a chilling malice that prickled the hairs on my neck. Twigs snapped underfoot as I pushed through the dense brush, the adrenaline in my veins, a burning fire, drowning out the searing pain in my limbs, the cuts on my skin, the terror in my heart. The wind howled through the branches, a mournful lament, carrying faint, distorted echoes of that horrific screech, a sound that would haunt my dreams for decades. When I finally burst out of the tree line, collapsing onto the hard shoulder of the highway, headlights, blinding and disorienting, washed over me. I crumpled, my vision fading, the faint, cloying scent of blood and pine needles lingering in the cold night air as I lost consciousness. It was the first time I ran. It would not be the last. I woke to the sterile, unforgiving brightness of a hospital room, surrounded by antiseptic white walls that felt suffocating in their cleanliness. The sheriff, a large, grim man whose face was etched with a weariness I'd soon understand, sat beside me, a notepad clutched in his beefy hand. He asked questions I couldn't answer, each one more pointed, more insistent than the last. They had found the house, not just damaged, ruined. Claw marks, impossibly deep and jagged, were etched into the walls, gouged into the very foundations. And the sight of those marks, physical proof of an impossible violence, was enough to silence any doubts they might have had about my frantic, unbelievable story. "We'll find out what happened to your dad, son," the sheriff said somberly, his voice devoid of conviction, a hollow promise that echoed the vast, empty space in my chest. His eyes, though trying to convey reassurance, betrayed a hint of something else, a deep, ancient fear, as if he, too, knew there were things in this world that couldn't be explained, couldn't be caught, couldn't be stopped. But they never did. They never found anything. 20 years later, I've built a life of sorts, a transient one, filled with late-night shifts in cheap motel rooms, always moving, always just a step ahead of the past. The worn leather jacket is a second skin, a tangible piece of every horror I've seen, and the old analog wristwatch, a nervous tick now, is my constant companion. I'm an ordinary man, or what's left of one, to whom extraordinary and terrible things just keep happening. My latest gig, a night security detail in some godforsaken industrial park, offered anonymity and a semblance of peace, a quiet desperation that suits me. But tonight, as I glance out the grimy window of the guard shack, a cold, familiar dread washes over me, chilling me to the bone, a sensation as distinct as the metallic tang I still occasionally smell when the air is still. Under the flickering, erratic streetlight, a figure stands. It's too far away for details, but its shadow stretches unnaturally long across the desolate pavement, a distorted, mocking caricature of a human form. The dim, uneven light casts an eerie glow, highlighting the edges of its hoodie, leaving its face obscured in profound darkness, a void where features should be. The air around it seems to ripple, heavy with that strange, oppressive energy, as if the very night itself is holding its breath, waiting. Its posture is familiar, sickeningly so, a subtle shift in the way it stands, a resonance with something deep and buried in my oldest nightmares. It wears a hoodie, a common enough garment, but as it slowly, deliberately looks up, the faint, sickly yellow glint in its hollow, inhuman eyes, even from this distance, tells me everything I need to know. It's back, and this time, it's not looking for my father. Character count, 9,976 characters. The thing was the color of a swamp, slick and obscene, impossibly large, a tumor of muscle and teeth and suction cups, anchored deep in the gaping wound of what had once been a human throat. The smell of copper and something fouler, something like old rotting meat and hot iron, choked the air, so thick I could almost taste it. My hand, slick with sweat, gripped the cheap kitchen knife, the flimsy steel feeling like a child's toy against the raw, animalistic horror unfolding before my eyes. This wasn't a nightmare. It was just Tuesday, or rather the grim, blood-soaked morning after Christmas, a festive occasion made utterly grotesque by a gift nobody asked for, a monster that crawled out of wrapping paper, and a fresh stain on my already tarnished soul. God, I hated the holidays. How I arrived at this festive tableau of gore and existential dread in a dusty Melbourne rental, miles from anything resembling home, is a story for another time. The short version, a bad decision, a dead-end job, and the universe's persistent, almost whimsical, insistence on making my life a living hell. It always starts small, doesn't it? A misplaced item, a strange hum, a whisper in the dark. This time, it began with a damn present. Melbourne in late December felt less like Christmas and more like a heat stroke waiting to happen. The air was thick, humid, clinging to the skin like a damp shroud, even at night. I'd taken a short-term house-sitting gig for a couple of well-meaning but ultimately clueless expats who jetted off to Europe for a white Christmas. My job was simple: keep the plants alive, check the mail, and make sure the place didn't burn down. Easy money, or so I thought. Just another temporary port in the storm, a place to hide my head, stay off the grid, and earn enough to fuel the next leg of this endless, aimless journey. Buster, my scruffy companion, was curled up on a throw rug, his soft snores the only sound of comfort in a house that already felt too quiet. The house itself was a standard suburban brick box, full of the kind of generic furniture you find in every rental, but they'd gone all out for Christmas. A fake pine tree, dusty with age, stood awkwardly in the corner of the living room, strung with cheap tinsel and ornaments that looked like they'd been fished out of a bargain bin. On Christmas Eve, I'd tossed a few more logs onto the digital fireplace loop playing on the TV, a futile gesture against the oppressive heat, and watched as Buster chased imaginary mice in his sleep. Under the plastic branches, nestled amongst a few legitimate, unopened gifts clearly left by the owners for their returning offspring. I noticed it for the first time. It was a small package, maybe 6 inches square, wrapped in an almost offensively bright shade of green paper, topped with a perfectly symmetrical little red bow. No tag, no indication of who it was for or who it was from. My first thought, the cynical one, was that the owners had forgotten it, or it was a last-minute addition by some distant relative. It wasn't my problem. I mentally filed it under unidentified detritus and went back to wondering why I couldn't just find a quiet corner of the world where nothing bizarre ever happened. A man could dream. Christmas Day passed in a blur of lukewarm, instant coffee and the drone of a cricket match on TV. I fed Buster, walked him around the block, dodging the cheerful, sweating families. The green present remained under the tree, an island of unexplained festive cheer in the corner of my peripheral vision. I made a point of not looking at it directly. My worn leather jacket hung on a coat rack by the door, a silent sentinel, always ready. I caught myself absently checking my old analog wristwatch, tracing the cool metal with my thumb. Not for the time, never for the time. Just a habit, a grounding mechanism in a world that never stops spinning off its axis. The true horror, as it always does, began subtly, a whisper on the edge of perception. I woke up on the 26th, Boxing Day, or whatever they called it here. with that familiar taste of ash and regret in my mouth. It was just after 2 a.m., the kind of hour that felt wrong for being awake, when the world was supposed to be in a shallow, oblivious sleep. I wasn't sure what had stirred me from my fitful doze. No specific noise, no sudden jolt, just that gnawing sense of wrongness, the one that had become a constant companion since that night in Sycamore Grove, since the phantom hitchhiker and Ethan's sickening smile, since Olivia's beautiful, macabre home. My throat was dry, a desert. I slid out of the cheap bed, careful not to disturb Buster, who was still snoring softly at my feet, and shuffled toward the kitchen in my slippers. The rental was dark, thick with the silence that only a truly empty house can produce. A silence that hums with unseen things. My bare foot hit something slick on the linoleum just outside the kitchen doorway. I swore under my breath, my mind immediately conjuring spilled water, a leaky pipe, another chore for Leo Vance, the unwitting caretaker of the universe's cosmic jokes. I flicked on the kitchen light, the fluorescent hum a welcome assault on the gloom. I poured myself a glass of water from the fridge, the cold liquid a shock against my parched throat. Leaning against the counter, I stared out the window, past the sickly orange glow of the streetlights, my mind drifting to vague travel plans. Anywhere but here. Japan. Maybe. They had good coffee. When I finished the water, I set the glass in the sink and turned to hit the light switch. That's when my eyes, accustomed now to the dimness beyond the kitchen's harsh light, drifted towards the hallway leading to the living room. And that's when I froze. The Christmas tree, a pathetic monument to misplaced cheer, was still standing. But under it, the green present was no longer green. It was a vicious, violent red, a deep, arterial crimson that screamed against the dull lighting. My breath hitched. I remembered its innocent green, the perfectly tied red bow. Now, the paper seemed to bleed, to weep color. A sickly, viscous sheen coated its surface. And then I saw the trail. It was impossible to mistake. Not spilled water, not a leaky pipe. A glistening, horrifying trail of bright red. Sticky blood snaked across the cheap, off-white carpet, leading directly from the open present, a jagged tear ripping through its former pristine surface and disappearing down the hallway towards the bedrooms. My body locked up, a statue carved from pure, unadulterated dread. Every instinct, every fiber of my being screamed at me to turn, to run, to sprint out that front door and never look back. My mind conjured the horrors I'd seen, the distorted faces in the walls, the chilling indifference of Ethan, the skin-lined rooms of Olivia's mansion. Every fiber, every instinct, save one. The one that was my damn fatal flaw. The reluctant conscience, the stubborn, self-destructive need to know, to understand, to somehow, pathetically, do something. It always dragged me deeper, like a lead weight tied to my ankle. My hand instinctively went to my worn leather jacket, not on my body, but hanging on the rack, a subconscious reach for the comfort of its weight, its familiarity. Then, the kitchen. My eyes darted to the knife block. I grabbed the largest one, a cheap chef's knife with a dull sheen, the handle slick in my sweating palm. It felt inadequate, a child's toy against whatever nightmare had just peeled itself out of that innocuous wrapping paper. But it was all I had. Buster, a few feet away, stirred. His ears twitched, his head lifted, his nostrils flaring. He let out a low, guttural growl, a sound I rarely heard from him. His eyes, fixed on the hallway, were wide, dilated. He saw it too, or smelled it. "Stay," I whispered, the word a raspy cough. Buster whined, a deep, worried sound, but held his ground, his gaze unwavering. Good dog. I crept forward, each step deliberate, agonizingly slow. The knife felt heavy, then impossibly light. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the oppressive silence. The smell grew stronger as I neared the hallway, metallic and sickly sweet, like a butcher shop in the middle of summer. My stomach churned. The blood trail was undeniable, a crimson river on the pale carpet, leading a direct path to the bedroom wing. My bedroom, my goddamn bedroom, the one where I'd left my go bag, always packed, always ready, but not ready for this. Never ready for this. I imagined the possibilities, each worse than the last. Had someone broken in? Unlikely. No signs of forced entry. Had something come within the house? More likely, given my track record. Was it waiting for me, crouched in the shadows, a grotesque parasite drawn by the scent of my lingering trauma, like a shark to blood in the water? The thought of the NDE, the cosmic farm, the sense of being a cattle for some unseen horror, flashed through my mind. This wasn't just bad luck. This was targeted. The trail led me to the open doorway of the master bedroom, the one I'd been using. My breath hitched in my throat, a ragged gasp. I hesitated, frozen, my hands shaking so violently the knife trembled like a tuning fork. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to turn and run. But that damn reluctant conscience, that self-destructive spark, held me in place. What if it was still in there? What if it wasn't? What if it had already left, but left something worse behind? With a sudden, desperate surge of adrenaline, I lunged forward, hand hitting the light switch in one frantic motion. The room exploded into harsh, unforgiving light. My eyes swept the space, desperate for confirmation, for anything. And then I saw it. It wasn't on the bed, not directly. It was on the floor, between the bed and the dresser, a shape, dark and glistening, a smear of impossible green-black against the pale carpet. The bed sheets, which I'd left neatly pulled back, were a mangled ruin, ripped and torn, soaked through with that same sickening red. My go bag, usually resting against the wall, was a shredded mess, its contents strewn across the floor. A ripped first aid kit, protein bars crushed under an invisible weight, a heavy Maglite flashlight bent at an unnatural angle, and the scent, the smell of ozone, of something ancient and foul, mingled with the thick, coppery reek of blood, filled my nostrils, making me gag. My gaze snapped to the thing on the floor. It was vast, slug-like, but disturbingly alien. Its skin, if you could call it that, was a smooth, dark green, almost the exact shade of the plastic Christmas tree, a horrifying mockery of festive cheer. It pulsed, a slow, sickening rhythm, like a bloated heart, and it was attached to something, to someone. My vision swam. It wasn't me. Thank God, it wasn't me. But the horror was no less profound. My eyes darted to the victim. It was the owner's cat, Whiskers, a fluffy, aloof ginger tabby that had been a silent observer of my temporary stay. The cat's small body was sprawled in an unnaturally rigid pose, its limbs splayed, twisted at angles no bone should allow. Its unseeing eyes were wide open, staring blankly at the ceiling, glazed with an opaque film. Blood saturated the small rug it lay upon, soaking into the cheap fibers, a grotesque parody of a festive pattern. The creature was latched onto the cat's neck, burrowed in, its head, bulbous and veined, had torn open the feline's throat and was sunk deep into the exposed wound. As I stared, transfixed by a horror so absolute it stole my breath, I saw the thing writhe, a slow, undulating movement as it fed. Its body, leech-like, seemed to swell even as I watched, distending, growing fatter on the lifeblood of the small creature. This wasn't just a parasite. It was an engine of consumption, a maw of pure, unadulterated hunger. A cursed minute stretched into an eternity. My mind screamed, but my body wouldn't obey. I couldn't move, couldn't even tear my eyes away from the repulsive sight. This thing, this grotesque mockery of life, felt profoundly wrong. A violation of the natural order so absolute it made the skin-wearing horror of Olivia's mansion seem almost quaint. It was a tangible piece of the cosmic indifference I'd glimpsed in that chilling vision of the farm. A reminder that the universe wasn't just unfeeling, but actively, malevolently hungry. Finally, the sheer, visceral revulsion broke the spell. I stumbled backward, the cheap kitchen knife clattering to the floor with a pathetic sound. I didn't care. I didn't care about anything but getting away from that thing. I scrambled out of the bedroom, tripping over Buster, who had followed me, whining, his hackles raised. He was whimpering now, a low, terrified sound, his tail tucked tight between his legs. Good boy. At least one of us still had a working flight instinct. I knew Whiskers was dead. There was no doubt. The sight, the smell, the impossible unnaturalness of it all, it carved itself into my mind. Another layer of scar tissue over a soul already flayed raw. I should call the police. That was the logical next step. But my mind, reeling from the shock, from the primal horror, could only fixate on one thing: the present, the source. I had to see it again, had to understand. I staggered back into the living room, my legs unsteady, my breath catching in my throat. The Christmas tree seemed to mock me, its pathetic lights twinkling with sinister cheer. The box, what remained of it, was a mess. The bright red wrapping paper, which I now realized had been green just yesterday, was not just stained, but thoroughly logged through with blood, a gruesome pulp. The top of the box had been savagely ripped off, a gaping maw in the cardboard, as if the creature had burst forth in a frenzy. I knelt, my knees protesting on the stained carpet, and stared into the ruined box. The stench of blood was overwhelming now, coupled with that strange, fetid odor from the creature. Inside, half submerged in the clotted, crimson mess, was something I couldn't immediately identify. A mangled piece of meat. It was shapeless, grayish, mottled with darker patches. The police, when they finally came, would later identify it as a dismembered human hand. Most likely, a grotesque provision, food for the creature, sealed in with it, a perverse Christmas dinner for the hungry horror within. But my gaze fixed on something else, something small, miraculously unstained by the gore. A scrap of white paper, barely an inch square, sitting perfectly pristine on the bloody pulp. My hand, still trembling, reached for it. My fingers, slick with sweat and something else, carefully pinched the edges. I pulled it free, holding it up to the dim light of the living room. The words were written in impeccable cursive, elegant loops and flourishes, a stark, chilling contrast to the butchery around me. This is the gift that awaits everyone on the naughty list. Let it be a warning to you all. Cole is hungry, and he will feed. Merry Christmas. SC. My breath hitched, my heart pounded, not just from fear, but from a cold, creeping certainty. C. Not Santa Claus, not a prank. No, the cosmic dread I'd felt, the sense of being watched, judged, selected. The things I'd seen, the impossible horrors I'd survived, the constant flight from a past I couldn't remember, but felt in my bones. It wasn't random, it was a damn judgment. Cole is hungry, and he will feed. The creature, then, the thing that had just drained a cat dry. It wasn't just a monster, it was an instrument. And the gift? It hadn't been misplaced, it had been delivered. To me. A perverse present for Leo Vance, the man forever on the naughty list. The implications settled over me like a suffocating blanket. My past, the one I couldn't recall, the one that made me a magnet for this horror, was catching up. The curse of Sycamore Grove wasn't just a memory, it was an active, malevolent force, meticulously tracking me, delivering me a personalized message from the void. Every step I took, every temporary job, every nameless town I hid in was just delaying the inevitable. I wasn't running from my past. My past was simply taking its time, enjoying the hunt. I looked at the crumpled note in my hand, then at the shredded go bag, the bent flashlight, my tools for survival, rendered useless, just like me. I felt a cold, bitter laugh bubble up in my throat, choked off before it could escape. Merry Christmas, indeed. Buster whined, nosing my hand. I looked at him, his scared, trusting eyes. He was the one thing, the only thing, that tethered me to anything resembling decency. And now, he was here, with me, on the naughty list. The reluctant conscience, or my fatal flaw, twisted in my gut. I had to get us out. But where? Where do you run when you're being hunted by a cosmic delivery service? When the universe itself is sending you a present? The answer, I realized with a chilling certainty, was nowhere. There was no escape, not in this life, and certainly not beyond it. The farm was waiting, and so was Cole. Total characters, 9:45. The tang of copper and ozone clung to my tongue, thick and cloying, a taste I knew intimately, one that always presaged the kind of hell ordinary men only saw in their worst nightmares. Blood, not my own, slicked my worn leather jacket, a grotesque abstract art painted by another family's demise. The wail of sirens, growing closer, wasn't a comfort. It was the soundtrack to the end of a world, a chorus of disbelief that would soon be met with the cold, hard proof of what I just witnessed. My hands, still trembling, wanted to reach for the familiar, comforting weight of my old analog watch. But they were clenched, useless fists, sticky and warm. Plug your ears if you hear that jingle, lock your doors, and for God's sake, don't let your children near the truck. The words were a silent scream in my skull, a litany of rules carved into my very being by the last few minutes of impossible horror. But those rules, I knew, were born from the kind of knowledge that came at too high a price I just watched someone else pay in full. It had begun, as these things always did, with a deceptive whisper of normalcy, a sun-drenched afternoon that felt too perfect to be true. I'd been working the graveyard shift at the warehouse on the outskirts of Elmwood for the past month, running down some inventory discrepancies. Tonight was my last night before moving on. Another town, another forgotten job, another futile attempt to outrun the shadow that clung to me like a second skin. I was just taking a detour through a quiet, upper-middle-class suburb, looking for a shortcut back to the main highway. The air was thick with the lazy hum of summer, the kind of quiet that makes you suspicious when you've seen too much. Manicured lawns, two-car garages, the gentle scent of freshly cut grass. It was a picture of suburban bliss, a scene straight out of a damn greeting card. My hand instinctively went to the cool steel of my old wristwatch, tracing the worn edges. 4:30. Time for the kids to be out playing, for the illusion of safety to be at its most potent. That's when the jingle started. Familiar, insidious. The saccharine, tinny melody of an ice cream truck, warbling from unseen speakers. It was that specific tune, the one everyone knows, ingrained in the collective subconscious of childhood. A pleasant, nostalgic sound for anyone else. But for me, it felt like a discordant note in a symphony of dread. My blood ran cold, the kind of chill that sinks past the bone and settles in the marrow. I had no idea why, not then. Just a primal, animalistic certainty that something was profoundly wrong. My grip tightened on the steering wheel of my beat-up sedan, knuckles white. Every hair on my arm stood on end. It was the same prickle I'd felt as a child. Standing on the edge of the woods behind our house, a sense of an unseen presence, a deep-seated wrongness that had always preceded, well, everything. The jingle grew louder, rounding the corner, and then I saw it, a boxy, white truck, emblazoned with the words Mr. Frosty's Ice Cream in cheerful, melting letters. It was pristine, almost unnaturally so, glowing in the afternoon sun. No rust, no dents, no peeling paint. Too perfect. Even from a distance, the vehicle looked less like something that had traversed countless streets and more like a prop, freshly pulled from a freezer box. And the jingle, it was too loud, too clear, assaulting the senses with its cloying cheerfulness. It didn't just play, it piped, a relentless beckoning siren song that seemed to vibrate in the very air, burrowing into the soft gray matter of anyone within earshot. I watched, a morbid fascination taking hold. As a young boy, maybe 8 or 9, with a mop of blonde hair and eyes the color of a summer sky, bounced excitedly towards it. His father, a man in a polo shirt with a friendly, unassuming air, followed a few paces behind, a fond smile playing on his lips. They were a picture of innocent domesticity, the kind of scene I usually went out of my way to avoid, lest it stir up the bitter ashes of my own buried past. But now it was a tableau of impending doom, lit by the cruel, golden light of the late afternoon. My cynical brain, the one that usually told me to floor it and get out, was screaming at me. Just go. Vance, don't get involved. You know how this ends. But my other half, the reluctant conscience I cursed daily, dug its heels in. It was the same damn impulse that had kept me rooted in that dilapidated house in Sycamore Grove as a kid, when every instinct shrieked to run, to save myself. It was the same stubborn, stupid guilt that made me stop for hitchhikers, or look into the dark places I should have avoided. So, I cut the engine, the sudden silence inside my car amplifying the relentless jingle outside. I watched, my jaw tight, as the truck lumbered to a halt beside the boy, 25 feet away, maybe 30, close enough to see the details, far enough to feel utterly helpless. The father walked up, a relaxed posture, his hands in his pockets. The boy peered up at the menu board, a picture of innocent anticipation. The driver's side window was tinted, impenetrable, no glint of glass, no hint of a face within, just an inky void. And then the serving window scraped open, a sound that shouldn't have been audible from my distance, but it was, a sickening metallic shriek, like abused metal tearing on rusty rollers. The sound vibrated in my teeth, a fingernail drawn down a chalkboard, infinitely amplified. And through that newly opened gap, I saw it. Or rather, I didn't see it. The inside of the truck was drenched in shadow, a black so profound it seemed to devour the brilliant afternoon sunlight, mocking its very existence. It was like looking into a wound in reality, a tear in the fabric of the world where light ceased to exist. A chill, bone-deep and absolute, bit into the air, radiating from the truck, chasing away the summer warmth. My stomach clenched. That familiar cold dread coiled in my gut. This wasn't right. This wasn't just a chill. It was the raw, unnatural cold that came before something truly awful. My mind, a cynical catalog of horrors, flashed to the things I'd glimpsed in the dark corners of the world, the whispers of entities that bled through the veil. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Run, you idiot, run! But I was frozen, my gaze locked on the boy, on the father, on the gaping maw of the truck. The boy, Kyle, sensing something was wrong, that preternatural sixth sense children sometimes possess, turned, his bright blue eyes, wide and innocent, fixed on his father, then on the truck, a tiny flicker of confusion playing on his face. He didn't have time to process it. One moment, he was standing there, vibrant and alive. The next, a grotesque, impossible mass of spider legs exploded from the inky darkness of the serving window. Hairy, jointed feelers, a writhing, seething tangle of nightmare, shot out, coiling around the boy. He was sucked in, not pulled, but vacuumed, like shrink wrap through a powerful industrial cleaner. A sickening whoomp of air escaped his lungs, a sound devoid of a scream, as he snapped backward like a rag doll. His head hit the top of the window frame with a wet crack, lolling unnaturally to the side. And then he was gone, swallowed by the impossible darkness within the truck. A strangled sound tore from my own throat, a voiceless wail of horror and futile rage. My foot slammed on the gas pedal, the tires spitting gravel as my sedan lurched forward. I barely registered the father's guttural scream, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony that would echo in my mind for weeks. My vehicle fishtailed, and I cursed, fighting the wheel. The ice cream truck, meanwhile, began to move, the cheerful jingle still mocking the horror it had just unleashed. I jammed the car into park, leaping out before it had fully stopped, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. My worn leather jacket flapped behind me as I sprinted, fueled by a desperate, idiotic surge of that cursed conscience. What was I going to do? I had no plan, just a suicidal need to do something. I reached the truck as it pulled away, my vision blurred with adrenaline and the sickening knowledge of what I was witnessing. I slammed my fist against the side, a dull thud against the cold metal, then grabbed the edge of the serving window, pulling myself up, peering into the impossible void that had consumed the child. The interior of the truck was a spatial anomaly, a gaping, cavernous space that defied all logic. It was not a truck, it was a portal, a vast, echoing abattoir, stretching into an unseen distance. The air inside was thick with the stench of something ancient and metallic, the coppery tang of fresh blood mingling with the cloying sweetness of stale sugar and a faint, indescribable musk of decay. My eyes, ever observant, scanned the horrific panorama. Dilapidated cattle chutes, slick with a glistening, reddish-brown residue, snaked through the darkness, leading to a sprawling plant floor textured with stained, grimy linoleum. It was a factory, a killing floor, designed with an efficient, horrifying purpose. This wasn't some forgotten relic of industry. It was a living, breathing nightmare. And the livestock? Oh God, the livestock. Hundreds of them. Children, small, pale shapes. Their movements sluggish, listless. Their faces slack and devoid of expression. Their eyes were glazed, empty, like broken dolls. They shuffled along the chutes, caked in their own filth, their small forms dwarfed by the hulking figures that moved among them, figures in blood-stained aprons, their faces obscured by USGI cold weather masks, the kind designed for Arctic conditions. But here, they hid something far colder than ice. They moved with a chilling efficiency, wielding curved knives, opening throats with wet, tearing sounds. There were no screams. That was the worst part. The silence was absolute, broken only by the weak shuffle of small feet, the syrupy slap of blood hitting the floor, and the occasional soft thud of a lifeless body. The dead were hoisted, ankle up, onto a conveyor system that hummed softly in the oppressive darkness. Like at a dry cleaner's, they zipped off through a darkened portal, into the unknown. A hot trail of blood still sprayed from their severed necks, misting the air with a fine crimson spray. I felt a wave of nausea so profound it threatened to buckle my knees. My stomach roiled, a hot rush of vomit threatening to climb my throat. This was it. This was the source, the wellspring of the cosmic dread that had haunted me since Sycamore Grove. The same pervasive evil, operating with a cold, terrifying indifference. It was a familiar flavor of horror, but scaled up, infinitely more ravenous. This wasn't just a monster, it was an industry, a system. As the truck continued to pull away, my grip slipping, a pale, small hand reached out from the gloom. My heart leaped into my throat. It was Kyle, his head pitched at a sickening angle, his eyes dead, vacant, but still, something. A spark, a tiny flicker of recognition, buried beneath the horror. And then, he spoke. A single word, whispered in a voice I would never hear again, a voice stripped of its childish innocence, tinged with a chilling finality. "Run!" Then, with a sudden, impossible force, he slammed the serving window shut. Just as the gap closed, I saw the massive spider legs encircle him from behind, intertwining like grotesque fingers. They covered his mouth, his eyes, tearing him backward, deeper into the dark, sending him toward the slaughter line. The truck growled up the street, its cheerful jingle echoing, mocking. It turned the corner, the sound fading, and disappeared from view, carrying off the son of a stranger, a child I had tried and failed to save, just like I had failed my own family all those years ago. I stumbled back, landing hard on the asphalt, the sickening crunch of gravel under my spine. The father of the boy was already on his knees, a raw, primal howl tearing from his throat, a sound that mirrored the one I'd heard from my own mother so long ago. He looked at me, his eyes wide and vacant, the gaze of a man whose world had just been ripped apart. I didn't say anything. What could I say? "Your son was taken to a meat locker run by multi-limbed horrors?" The words would stick in my throat. Useless. The next few hours were a blur of flashing blue and red lights, the guttural mumble of police radios, and the flat, unblinking stares of detectives in cheap suits. The father, a man named Michael, was inconsolable. His wife, Jessica, arriving later, her scream of anguish tearing through the quiet suburban street like a physical wound. She collapsed, wailing for her son, while their daughter, Maya, perhaps 8, clung to her mother's leg, her face a mask of bewildered terror. I stayed in the background, a silent, grim observer. They asked me what I saw. I lied, told them of Mr. Frosty's ice cream truck, exactly as it was. Took him. No spider legs, no impossible interior, no slaughterhouse. They would have locked me in a padded cell. Or worse, accused me of involvement. My word carried no credence. I knew that. My life on the road, my lack of roots, my detached demeanor, it all screamed suspect. They put out a statewide APB. They found nothing. Of course, they found nothing. The night that followed was a black void of despair. I stayed, compelled by that damn conscience, by the echoing scream of the mother. I sat in my car, parked down the street, watching their house, a silent sentinel. Michael and Jessica didn't sleep. Her face was puffy, her eyes red-rimmed and vacant. Maya, the younger twin, was smart, too smart for her age. She understood the weight of the silence, the crushing grief that had descended upon their home. She had put herself to bed without fuss, a small, young, somber ghost in her pink PJ onesie. I was numb, my body cold. A sick lie, I thought, giving them any hope. I knew what I had seen, deep down, in the furthest pit of my stomach. I knew their son, like all those children, was gone, dead. Blindly shuffled up the murder chute to those hulking things in bloody aprons. Around midnight, a small figure appeared in the doorway of their home, silhouetted against the dim light within. Maya, clutching her pink blanket, her eyes wide but not with simple fear. Something else, recognition. A chill snaked up my spine. This wasn't normal grief. This was the prelude to something I knew all too well. Michael, hollow-eyed, looked at his wife. "What?" he mumbled, barely audible. Jessica, her voice thick with snot and tears, blew into a tissue. "Kyle's out there. We should be looking for him, trying to find that truck." She cut him an accusing glare, the blame a palpable thing between them. It wasn't her fault. It wasn't his. It was the truck's. Then Maya spoke, her voice a thin, reedy whisper that cut through the night, slicing through the remnants of false hope. "He's home, Daddy," she said. "Kyle's home." My blood ran cold. The kind of cold that steals your breath, that leaves your skin clammy and your mind screaming, "No, not this, not again." My hand, trembling, went to my watch. The minute hand seemed frozen. I watched, my heart thundering as Michael and Jessica rushed to the back door. The porch light flickered on, painting the scene in a sickly yellow glow. The thing that came through their back door was not their son. It looked like Kyle. It walked like him, a shambling, mud-caked gait. But it wasn't him, not truly. Its pale skin was streaked with grime, but it was the eyes that froze me, cold and dead. Not the warm, innocent blue puddles they had been, but two icy marbles that seemed to freeze the air around them. There was a knowing, malevolent smile twisting its face, a parody of childish innocence. Jessica sobbed, wrapping the mud-streaked imitation of her son in an embrace. It didn't hug back. Those two cold eyes were pinned on Michael, then on me, a flicker of something ancient and terrible in their depths, as if acknowledging my presence, my curse. "Why'd you do it, Daddy?" The voice was Kyle's, but it was wrong. Too flat, too hollow. They led it into the living room, a family walking into a nightmare. I could feel Maya's body tense up against her mother's, a small, desperate tremor. She knew. She saw it. She knows something bad is about to happen. "What?" Jessica asked, her voice cracking with confusion. "Why'd you try to kill me? Try to kill me, huh, Daddy? Why? I thought you loved me. Dad, I thought you..." Its head reared back impossibly far on its neck, a sickening crackle of cartilage and bone. Its mouth curved into a dark, perfect O, growing wider, impossibly wide. A throaty, gurgling sound emanated from its throat. Its eyes rolled back into their sockets, showing only the whites, like a pair of blind, unseeing orbs. Jessica looked at Michael, her eyes wide with dawning horror, then back at the thing that was supposed to be her son. She started backing up, a slow, terrified shuffle. Michael, too, was frozen, his face ashen. They retreated into the living room, the Kyle thing bearing down on them, forcing them back. Maya had started to sob, clutching her pink blanket to her face, her warm, salty tears soaking her mother's shirt. The O of Kyle's mouth continued to expand, drawing further and further as it spoke again. Only this time, its lips didn't move. And the voice, deeper, warped, like the words of a demon from the mouth of the possessed, came hissing out of its throat, a wet, guttural sound that seemed to tear at the very fabric of reality. "Why, Dad? Why'd you fucking do it? You like killing little kids. Dad? Want to kill Maya? Want to see her pigtails wrapped in brain? Stop!" Michael's voice was a weak, thin rasp, lost in the echoing horror. The thing chuckled, a wet, slithering sound, as Kyle's mouth continued pulling back, impossibly wide. Its lips were coated in a glistening bile, thick and viscous. Its teeth were brown and jagged, like broken splinters of ancient bone. Jessica's head snapped between the monstrosity that wore her son's face and her husband, her face a mask of shattered disbelief. Her legs hit the couch, and she crumpled onto the cushion with a surprised gasp. It was lost in the hoarse, demonic voice that had hijacked her son's mouth. "Want to bash her little head in? Hammer it until crumples and all those little girl thoughts and feelings come spilling out?" The corners of the Kyle thing's mouth tore. Rivulets of blood, dark and sluggish, sledded down its throat, staining the front of its mud-streaked shirt. Its mouth continued to pull back, like its head was splitting up on a hinge, bone and tendons snapping and crackling with sickening wet sounds. The lower half of its face was soaked in its own grotesque blood. "Make him stop, Dad," Maya moaned, her voice muffled by her blanket, a plea for a world that no longer existed. Michael couldn't speak. His voice was lost, swallowed by the terror. His Adam's apple bobbed convulsively, but no sound escaped. The Kyle thing's mouth split wider. wider, the sound of tearing flesh and grinding bone sickeningly loud in the confined space, its throat distended and undulated, like there was a knot of fingers trying to claw their way out. "Want to be a butcher, Dad?" The voice within the Kyle thing chuckled, a wet, slithering sound that scraped at the raw nerves of my soul. Hack through gristle and vein and the stretch of pink flesh connecting tiny heads to tiny bodies. Feel the warm rush of blood over your hands. Feel your knife scrape bone as they drain. Its words were a poison, meant to break the man, to unravel his sanity. Want to watch the light bleed from their eyes as their life bleeds from their throat? Want to, Dad? Want to? Then, with a final horrific tearing sound, the Kyle thing's head tore back, its cheeks ripping, its mouth forced open in an awful, hellish grin, and the mass of hairy, jointed spider legs exploded from its throat, writhing and snapping into the living room, a sudden, grotesque blooming of pure horror. Jessica started to scream, a high-pitched, piercing shriek of absolute terror. One of the spider legs, thick and segmented, lashed out, batting her across the face with a wet thwack. Her head snapped around, a sickening crackle echoing, and she pitched forward, landing on the couch with the boneless weight of a sack of grain. That galvanized Michael. He let out a wordless roar, galvanized by a primal, desperate surge of fatherly instinct. He flung Maya onto the couch and lurched for the rack of fireplace tools. The spider legs crackled and snapped, flickering around like a net of tendrils from the Kyle thing's broken mouth. Maya was shrieking, a raw sound of pure, childlike terror. The spider legs lunged for her, shooting forward, long and dark, aiming for her delicate, small form. Michael tore the poker free of the fire rack, a heavy, blunted piece of wrought iron. He whipped around, using his forward momentum, bringing the heavy instrument down with as much force as he could muster. A desperate, valiant swing against the impossible. Only he missed. Oh, God, how he missed. Maya, in her childlike terror, had instinctively lunged away from the spider thing trying to kill her. She had lunged right into the arc of her father's swing. The barbed end of the poker hit the center of her skull, not the monster's, and went burrowing into her brain. I heard bones snap like glass, a sickening, wet crack. I saw the poker ease into the spongy folds of her mind. She fell, like a puppet whose strings had been cut, landing face down with a sickening thud. A tiny, strangled sob escaped her lips. Her small hand clenched into a microscopic fist against the patterned rug, and then she died. The Kyle thing began to roar with laughter, a wet, gurgling sound of triumph that was utterly inhuman. It turned on Michael, its spider legs flickering and pulsing, snapping in all directions like 10 of those inflatable dealership tube men, obscenely alive. "You like killing kids, Dad? You like—" Then, a surprised gasp. The spider legs snapped erect, like soldiers at attention, as the animation drained from the Kyle thing's face. Michael, broken by what he had just done, had wrenched the poker free of his daughter's broken mind and, with a final, desperate surge of fury, plunged it into the Kyle thing's left eye. Its ocean blue eyeball deflated, a thin run of viscous, yellow pus running down one cheek. Then the tendrils sucked back into its mouth with a final, wet gurgle, and the Kyle thing pitched forward, landing on the floor with a heavy, final thud, as dead as the rest of his family. I stood there on the street, misted in their children's blood, their screams still echoing in my ears. The sight of the slaughtered children inside the truck burned into my retinas. The sirens were closer now, a banshee wail. My hands, still clenched into useless fists, began to tremble uncontrollably. This was my life. This was the curse. To witness, to be drawn in, to be tainted by the horrors that stalked the edges of reality. My own past, the Sycamore Grove incident, felt less like a distant memory and more like a fresh wound, reopened by the agony of these strangers. The ice cream truck, a beacon of childhood joy, had become another testament to the universe's indifference, to the hungry things that preyed on the innocent. I was broken. A man ruined by a summer day, by a haunting jingle, by a glimpse into a darkness I would never truly escape. I'm sure my name would be bolded in the paper, conjoined to some variation of family annihilator or witness to tragedy. But it wasn't me, not directly. I bore the blame. God, how I did. The blame of a man cursed to witness, cursed to carry the knowledge, cursed to be forever pulled towards the very horrors he tried to outrun, and then, forever alone, left to write his warnings. If your kids ask for ice cream, buy them a tub of the store-bought stuff. It's just as good. My only hope, a flimsy, desperate prayer, was that someone, somewhere, would listen and survive. Character count excluding instructions. 9,167 characters. The world had a way of kicking you when you were down, then asking if you'd mind staying there so it could get a better angle. Tonight, the world wasn't just kicking, it was performing open-heart surgery with a rusty butter knife. Frankie's last breath hitched in her throat, a choked gasp of horror, as Jake, the bastard, plunged something into her skull with a sickening, wet thud. It was over before the sound registered, before my mind could truly process what my eyes had just seen. The sheer, brutal efficiency of it. My scream, a raw, ragged sound that tore from my own throat, was a beat too late, an empty echo in the sudden, profound silence. My feet were already moving, a primal, animalistic surge of terror propelling me forward. Run! That single, desperate command hammered in my skull, obliterating all thought, all reason. Just run. That's how it always ended, wasn't it? Running, always running. Tonight, though, the terror had a sharper edge, a colder, more personal sting than usual. It started hours earlier, somewhere north of the city limits, under a sky that looked like a bruised peach. I was behind the wheel of my rig, the familiar rumble of the diesel engine, a low thrum beneath me, a constant, dull companion to the weariness that had settled deep in my bones. Another late-night haul, another anonymous stretch of highway. Just how I liked it. Keep moving. Don't get comfortable. Don't get seen. It was the only way I knew how to survive, though survival felt less like a victory and more like a prolonged, agonizing deferment of the inevitable. My old analog wristwatch, a relic I clung to like a drowning man to a plank, read a little past midnight when the light flickered across my rearview mirror. Not a deer, not an animal. Something off. I'd seen enough things off in my life to know the feeling. The prickle on the back of my neck, the subtle tightening in my gut. Instinct, honed by years of running from things that shouldn't exist, screaming at me to keep my foot on the gas and not look back. But my foot, damn it, eased off the pedal. Call it curiosity, call it a fatal flaw. I called it a self-destructive itch I could never quite scratch. The headlights cut through the gloom, painting a tableau of violence on the gravel shoulder. A woman, small and thin, crumpled at the feet of a hulking man. He was a shadow, indistinct in the harsh glare, but his intent was crystal clear. Every swing of his fist was a punctuation mark on the air, each impact a sickening thump that reverberated even from the highway. My hand, without conscious thought, went to the crown of my watch, turning it uselessly. Don't get involved, Leo. The voice of cynicism, my oldest friend, whispered in my head. Just keep driving. You've seen worse. You've done worse. What good will you do? But another voice, a quieter, more insistent one that I'd learned to dread, pulled at me. It was the voice of the reluctant conscience, the one that hated letting things burn, the one that reminded me of things I'd rather forget, things I'd failed to stop. Sycamore Grove, the smell of smoke and fear, the faces I couldn't save. No, not again. not if I could help it. I pulled the rig to the shoulder, the air brakes hissing like an angry viper. The worn leather of my jacket felt heavy on my shoulders, a familiar weight that was both comfort and burden. A couple of quick checks, doors locked, go bag under the seat, knife within reach in the glove compartment. More for routine than any real belief it would make a difference. What good was a knife against a monster, when the monster often wore a human face? I grabbed my heavy mag light, its beam a comforting, solid cylinder in the suffocating darkness, and stepped out. The chill hit me first, a sudden drop in temperature that had nothing to do with the night air. It was the kind of cold that seeped into your bones and froze the blood in your veins, the kind that screamed, "Wrong." "Hey!" My voice was rougher than I intended, an attempt at authority that felt hollow even to my own ears. "What the hell is going on here?" The hulking man paused, his arm frozen mid-swing, silhouetted against the blinding glare of his own car's headlights. The woman below him whimpered, a small, pained sound that twisted something in my gut. He turned, and I could finally make out his features, a face hard and brutal, eyes like chips of flint. Jensen, I'd later learn, a name that would forever taste like bile. "None of your business, pal," Jensen snarled, his voice thick with menace. "Just keep driving." My grip tightened on the maglite. "Looks like my business when there's a woman getting beaten on the side of a public road." He took a step towards me, his bulk intimidating even from a distance. My eyes, ever scanning, caught something else then. Not a person, not an animal. A ripple, a distortion in the air, a shimmer of heat above the gravel. Even though the air was freezing, it was like looking at something through dirty, undulating water. And then, the feeling, a vast, ancient malevolence, like a hungry void, expanding in the space between Jensen and the woman. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird desperate to escape its cage. This wasn't just a domestic dispute anymore. This was other. The ripple solidified. It was cloaked, hooded, its form vaguely human. But I knew, with the chilling certainty of absolute terror, that it wasn't. It moved with an impossible glide, not walking, not floating, but simply being from one point to another. It wasn't striding, it was manifesting. A silent, terrifying promise of something profoundly wrong. The air crackled with an unseen energy, a faint scent of ozone like after a lightning strike, clinging to the damp night. The entity stopped beside the woman, who was still trying to scramble away from Jensen's boot. It seemed to lean over her, though there was no discernible head or body to lean. And then, a sound that wasn't a sound. A whisper that vibrated not in my ears, but in my very bones. A wish to be someone else. Anyone else. My vision blurred at the edges, a dizzying spiral of black and red, like blood in water. I felt a tug, a sensation of something being ripped, not from my body, but from the very fabric of the reality around me. It was the fleeting, horrific brush of two souls exchanging places, and for a terrifying, sickening second, I thought it was my soul being torn, my curse, my marked nature, vibrating in horrific sympathy with the raw, desperate magic unfolding before me. A fleeting, crimson shimmer, like a single droplet of pure fear, seemed to brush past me in the swirling chaos, moving in the opposite direction from the torrent. Was that her soul? Was it mine? I didn't know, and I didn't want to. My stomach lurched. The world righted itself with a jarring snap. Jensen, the hulking brute, suddenly shrieked, a high, reedy sound, entirely out of place coming from that mountain of a man. He stumbled back, lifting his boot from the woman, his face contorted in a mask of genuine, bewildered terror. The woman below him, now free, gasped for air, then slowly, agonizingly, pushed herself up, and that's when the true horror started. The man who had been Jensen now looked at his own massive, bruised hands with wide, terrified eyes. And the woman who had been Bethany now stood in Jensen's body, equally bewildered, a desperate moan tearing from her lips. My mind, usually so quick to find a sarcastic quip, struggled to process. They had swapped. The entity, having delivered its twisted miracle, had already dissipated, leaving nothing but the bone-deep cold and the lingering scent of something metallic and foul. "What the?" I started, but my voice died in my throat. The woman in Jensen's body spoke first, her voice raspy, alien in that heavy frame. "We have to call someone." Then the man in Bethany's body stammered, "Bethany, is that you? What is happening?" I watched them, a macabre dance of identity crisis unfolding under the truck's high beams. My cynical brain tried to find the angle, the con, the trick, but there was no trick. Just raw, unadulterated reality warped beyond recognition. This was a nightmare of the purest kind, a consequence of desperation and malevolent magic. "I don't know," the woman in Jensen's body blubbered, backing away towards Jensen's car, a sleek, black sedan that looked out of place on this deserted road. "Let's get out of the street." The man in Bethany's body, Jensen's mind trapped in Bethany's frail frame, pointed a trembling finger. "You did this to me, didn't you? How?" He started pounding Jensen's body, his own body, with Bethany's weak, shaking fists, the pathetic blows barely making a dent. It was horrifying. The lack of understanding on his face, the sheer, animalistic confusion that someone could do this to him, the man who had always been the one in control. It was sickening. But even more sickening was the moment Bethany and Jensen's body caught the small, weak fist. Not with violence, but with a strange, hesitant tenderness. A dawning realization on her face. Power. Not the kind that Jensen wielded like a weapon, but the kind that came from physical strength, from being able to defend oneself. And in that moment, I saw a flicker of something ancient in her eyes. A decision. "Get in the car," he ordered, voice still rough but undeniably firm. To my surprise, Jensen in Bethany's body didn't protest. He looked at his shaking fists, the marks of abuse still fresh on her body, then back at the formidable frame of his former self. He complied. They clambered into the sedan, the woman in Jensen's body taking the driver's seat, and sped off into the night. I was left alone on the highway, the stench of ozone and damp earth hanging heavy in the air, a single drop of something dark and viscous glinting on the gravel where Bethany had lain. My heart was still hammering, but my mind, ever the cynic, was already cataloging. A wish, a cloaked figure, a body swap, and I was the only witness. Great, Leo. Just what you needed. Another reason to look over your shoulder every damn second. My hand went to my watch again, checking the time that didn't matter. Another tick on the cosmic score sheet of my fucked up life. Another horror added to the growing pile. I got back into my rig, the cab suddenly feeling too small, too vulnerable. The silence of the highway, usually a comfort, now felt like a predatory hush. I should have driven, should have just kept going. But the image of Bethany's eyes in Jensen's face, the flicker of agency, the desperation, it kept me rooted. My reluctant conscience, my curse, whatever you wanted to call it, had already decided for me. I started the engine and pulled back onto the road, following the direction they had gone. The sedan wasn't hard to spot. Jensen, even in Bethany's body, wasn't a subtle man. I kept a safe distance, watching them weave through the bending country lanes. The woman in Jensen's body was driving with a fierce, almost desperate focus. Jensen in Bethany's body was hunched over, gripping the handle above the door, visibly struggling. My jaw ached. I could almost hear the internal monologue of the woman, the one now inhabiting Jensen's frame. Why am I trying to save him? She'd be thinking, I should have left him at the side of the road. It was a thought I was intimately familiar with myself, one I'd wrestled with after every time my conscience dragged me into trouble. The cold, logical part of my brain, the part that had kept me alive this long, screamed for self-preservation. But the other part, the part that still remembered the Sycamore Grove fire, the helpless screams, that part always won. Or, more accurately, lost. They pulled into a driveway in front of a small, slightly ramshackle house. Frankie's house, I later pieced together. And that's when the situation escalated from bizarre to actively dangerous. A Ford Ranger, beat up and covered in derogatory bumper stickers, already sat in the driveway. Jake's truck, Jensen's friends. Of course, the world always found a way to make things worse. My stomach clenched. Jensen alone was a monster. Jensen with his pack, a whole different kind of terror. I parked my rig down the street, melting into the shadows. A silent, unwilling sentinel. The woman in Jensen's body hesitated, her posture stiffening, but Jensen in Bethany's body, that vile, entitled creature, already had the passenger door open, a horrific smile stretching Bethany's bruised lips. He chuckled, a sound that curdled my blood. You wanted to talk to Frankie. Let's talk to Frankie. The absolute, unshakable arrogance of the man, even when trapped in a body he despised. It was chilling. He pounded on the door. I saw the woman in Jensen's body turn to him, whispering something, probably begging for caution. But Jensen in Bethany's body just scoffed. We're not going to explain anything. Do you want them to think we're crazy? The sheer lack of self-awareness. It was almost laughable, if it wasn't so profoundly disturbing. The door opened a crack, revealing a scared-looking woman, Frankie. Her eyes went from Jensen in Bethany's body to the woman in Jensen's body, and then she gasped, whimpering, Beth! Her face contorted with disgust as she looked at the hulking figure of Jensen, now inhabited by her friend. Jensen in Bethany's body, still trying to play the part, said, Nothing. He crashed the car. A lie, of course. A terrible, transparent lie. Frankie's eyes, wide with fear, went to the bruises on Bethany's face, then to the massive hands of Jensen in Bethany's body. She said, You need to go to the hospital. The woman in Jensen's body tried to interject, to get Frankie to come with them, to get help. But Jensen in Bethany's body smoothly cut her off, his voice cloying and false in Bethany's throat. I was being silly, honey. These are just cuts and bruises. They'll heal. You're so dramatic. The casual cruelty of it, spoken from the very lips of his victim. It made my skin crawl. Then the cavalry arrived. Jake, Matt, and Liam. 3 Neanderthals who walked like they owned the ground beneath them. Their expressions a mix of concern and barely concealed aggression. More monsters in human skin. My hand went to my watch again, my thumb rubbing the cool metal. This wasn't good. This wasn't good at all. Jensen in Bethany's body opened his mouth to greet his friends, then seemed to remember he was no longer himself. He watched wide-eyed as his cronies made a beeline for his, Jensen's body, now inhabited by Bethany. The irony would have been delicious if I wasn't so worried. The woman in Jensen's body struggled to mimic Jensen's voice, to sound like the man who had just beaten her. Hey guys, listen, I know I said that we should do this, but I've changed my mind. Let's go home. Jake scoffed, eyeing Jensen's body. Bethany suspiciously. What? No, we drove all the way here for you. Bethany needs an intervention, and you clearly aren't getting through to her. Sonny, that's why we're here, isn't it? We're not leaving until this has been sorted. Matt and Liam, 2 grunting automatons, echoed Jake's sentiment. My gut tightened. They were here to reinforce Jensen's control, to break Bethany completely. And now they were unwittingly doing it to their own friend, trapped in his victim's body. a grotesque puppet show, and I, the weary wanderer, was caught in the audience. The woman in Jensen's body wanted to ask if Frankie had been hurt, but she couldn't. It would break the illusion. And I knew, from the way Liam's eyes flickered to the battered face of Jensen in Bethany's body, that any deviation from the script would be met with violence. This was a powder keg, and the body swap had just thrown a match into it. Jensen in Bethany's body, however, seemed to relish the attention. "They're right, Jensen," he said, barely concealing his giddiness. "I've been acting insane. I need this. I've needed this for a long time." The words were Bethany's, the sentiment Jensen's. It was a sick echo. "Shut the up, bitch," Jake growled, eyes narrowed at Jensen in Bethany's body. "I wasn't talking to you, was I?" The shift was instantaneous. Jensen in Bethany's body flushed, a mix of frustration, embarrassment, and a dawning fear painting Bethany's face. He wasn't used to being suppressed. He wasn't used to being threatened. The power dynamic, so crucial to his existence, had been flipped. Frankie, bless her, tried to intervene. "Listen, this is, I'm going to call the..." Jake, a caricature of menace, mocked her. You're going to call the... You aren't going to call anyone." He rolled his eyes as Frankie's lip trembled. "You're not going to cry again, are you? We only came here to talk. Frankie, we're here for Bethany, not you. Now, are we going to head inside or stand on this porch all night?" Jensen in Bethany's body strolled into Frankie's house without hesitation, the epitome of arrogant male privilege, and the woman in Jensen's body followed, trying to offer Frankie a soft, apologetic smile. A smile that Frankie, seeing her friend's abuser's face, could only interpret as a cruel grin. This was a nightmare of miscommunication, a hell of mistaken identity. I felt a cold dread settle in my chest, a familiar friend. Inside, the living room felt claustrophobic. The air was thick with unspoken tension, the kind that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I watched from the shadows of the street, my senses stretched to their limit. "Now, Bethany, do you know why we're here?" Jake asked, his voice dripping with false concern. Jensen in Bethany's body replied, using a sweet tone that utterly betrayed Bethany's true feelings. "Yes, I do. I've been horrendous. I know I said I wanted to run to Frankie, but he really made me see how stupid I was being. I'm just a coward sometimes, I suppose. Frankie, no offense, but we're not even friends anymore, and are we? It's all about Jensen and me now. That's my focus. We just need a little work." Matt, the idiot, nodded sagely. "Relationships are hard, but you've got to trust Jensen. He's a good man. He's put up with a lot from you. You know, you're lucky to have him." Frankie scoffed, a tiny, defiant sound. "Have you got something to say, bitch?" Liam asked, his voice flat and dangerous. "Leave it," Jake interrupted, eyes still fixed on Bethany and Jensen's body. "We aren't here to fix her. We're here to help our buddy." The woman in Jensen's body, sensing the escalating tension, tried to intervene. "Beth, let's go upstairs for a second and have a private word." Her heart, I could feel it, must have been pounding. She was trying to protect Jensen, even after everything. Her damned conscience, just like mine. Jensen in Bethany's body rolled his eyes. "No, babe. We should stay here and listen to what the boys have to say. They're speaking sense. Is this what she's always like? Sonny?" Jake gasped, turning to the woman in Jensen's body. "You're a f***ing nightmare. Bethany, you don't respect him at all, do you? You don't want to work on this relationship? Go upstairs and talk to him. We'll be waiting down here." A moment of genuine shock flashed across Jensen in Bethany's body's face. Nobody had ever spoken to him like that. The humiliation was palpable. And the worst part was that he didn't understand why. But the woman in Jensen's body did. She knew these men. She knew the danger. My gut clenched in sympathy. I knew that fear. I felt it almost constantly, reluctantly. Jensen and Bethany's body nodded and followed the woman in Jensen's body upstairs. A brief reprieve. I allowed myself a single, ragged breath. Through the thin walls, I could hear their muffled voices. Jensen in Bethany's body, his voice small and whining, asking what the was happening. The woman in Jensen's body, voice still rough, trying to explain the reality of the situation, the body swap, the entity. And then the chilling shift. Jensen in Bethany's body's dawning, horrifying realization. He saw it not as a curse, but as a lesson. A cosmic intervention designed to make Bethany, now in his own abused body, understand his perspective. His unshakable narcissism, his inability to comprehend true empathy, was breathtaking in its monstrosity. He truly believed he was the victim, and this was all for her benefit. "That doesn't sound right, Jensen," the woman in Jensen's body said, her voice laced with dread. But he was already going back downstairs. "Let's finish this," he announced, his voice sickeningly cheerful in Bethany's ruined throat. "We'll sort everything out, then we'll end up back in our bodies. And you'll never be an ungrateful little bitch ever again. You'll finally appreciate what you have." My blood ran cold. This wasn't going to end well. I gripped my mag light tighter, my knuckles white. The woman in Jensen's body followed him, hissing, "Jensen, this isn't all sorted," Jensen in Bethany's body chirped, bouncing into the living room, a horrific parody of cheerful domesticity. Jake, oblivious, asked the woman in Jensen's body. "You okay, Sonny?" The woman in Jensen's body nodded slowly, playing along, trying to get rid of the psychos. "We talked, and she's going to behave. Thanks for your help. Guys, we'll take it from here." "That's it?" Liam asked, dull-eyed. "That's it," the woman in Jensen's body answered. But Jensen in Bethany's body, the cosmic idiot, couldn't leave well enough alone. "Oh, honey, surely, there's more to it than that. We have to work through everything if we want things to go back to the way they were. If you catch my drift?" The smug, knowing look on Bethany's bruised face was grotesque. That was the last straw. Jake howled. "What is your f***ing problem? Nothing's ever good enough for you." "No, I didn't mean that," Jensen in Bethany's body moaned, clearly tiring of his friend's treatment. The irony, a bitter, metallic taste, was almost overwhelming. "No, I didn't mean that," Matt mocked, giggling. "What a whiny little girl." It was then that Jensen in Bethany's body snapped. "Shut up, you dumb little—" He trailed off, realizing his monumental blunder. "What did you say to me?" Matt whispered, rising slowly from his seat, a predatory gleam in his eyes. Jensen in Bethany's body said nothing, turning pleading eyes to the woman in Jensen's body, expecting her to fix it, to put his friends back in line. The woman in Jensen's body tried. She truly tried. Just calm down, mate." "She's rotten, Jensen," Matt yelled, advancing on Bethany and Jensen's body. "You didn't hit her hard enough, or I hit her too hard," the woman in Jensen's body hurriedly added, trying to diffuse the situation with a desperate, fearful laugh. Hit her so hard that she, lost a few brain cells. Eh?" Matt didn't laugh. His friends didn't stop him. And in the next heartbeat, Matt pounced. He was on Jensen and Bethany's body, a vicious blur of fists and fury. Frankie screamed, finally finding her voice, and ran into the room. The woman in Jensen's body, that poor, trapped soul, lunged to save him, to save her own body. But Jake and Liam were too fast. They muscled her out of the way, holding her back. "This has been a long time coming. Sonny," Jake whispered in Jensen's ear, as Matt reduced what remained of Bethany's body into a pulp. "She's not high value, mate. There is no fixing her. You should have finished her earlier. but that's okay. We'll do it for you. It's what friends do. I watched from the street, my breath locked in my throat, a cold, hard knot of fear coiling in my gut, the sheer, grotesque horror of it. Jensen, the abuser, being beaten to death by his own friends, while wearing the ravaged body of his victim, his eyes in Bethany's face, wide and blood-soaked, finally reflecting the sheer, animalistic terror that Bethany must have known for years. The realization dawning on him that this frail, depleted body had no fortitude, no escape, but even that, I knew, paled in comparison to the horror the woman in Jensen's body was forced to endure, watching her own physical form being systematically destroyed, all hope of returning to her true self dying with every blow. After a minute of relentless aggression, Matt finally stopped. Jensen and Bethany's body lay still. My body stopped moving. "No!" Frankie screamed, finally breaking free of her paralysis, rushing out of the room, through the open front door. "Stop her!" Jake calmly ordered Liam, and that's when I unfroze. The decision was made. The die was cast. My reluctant conscience, my goddamn fatal flaw, had won. I wasn't going to just watch. Not again. With a sudden, explosive surge of adrenaline, I launched myself forward. My worn leather jacket, a second skin, chafed against my shoulders. An elbow to Liam's jaw, a grunt of surprise from him. A knee, hard and precise, to Jake's gut, doubling him over. I slipped between them, past their stunned faces, a ghost in the chaos, and followed Frankie out the door. "Help!" Frankie screamed, darting into the street. Matt, now recovered, hot on her heels. I lunged, arms curling around Matt's stomach, a bone-jarring tackle to the tarmac. We hit the ground hard, the impact jarring my teeth. "What are you doing?" Matt gasped, wrestling in the road. "Get off me, a hole! The bitch saw everything. We have to kill her." I responded with a well-aimed thump to his head, a sickening crack of bone against asphalt. Matt lay still. The ease of it, the cold efficiency, sickened me. My hand, without thinking, went to my wrist, my thumb tracing the dial of my watch. A nervous tick, a grounding mechanism in a world that had just tilted on its axis. Frankie had stopped running, staring at me in silent confusion. "What is happening out there?" Jake called from the front door, his voice laced with confusion. "Jensen?" "What are you doing?" Frankie asked, her voice a reedy whisper. "Frankie, I need you to listen to me," I said, walking slowly towards her. The cold, analytical part of my brain was already working. The cynical part. I had to protect her. I had to get her to understand. "We have to get out of here." "You killed Bethany," she sobbed, stumbling backward, arms outstretched, desperate to escape me. "You're monsters and you're all going to rot in prison. Help!" "It's me, Frankie," I said, trying to infuse my voice with something she'd recognize, some echo of her friend, despite the obvious absurdity. "It's Bethany," she gagged. "You're sick. You're all sick." I had to give her proof. Something only Bethany would know. Something from her past, a shared intimacy. My mind raced, grabbing at fragments. 2007, White House Camp. You told me that you'd never seen anything as beautiful as that blue and purple butterfly. Remember, we were looking up at the stars and... "Don't!" Frankie gasped, haunted by the memory. "That's not your story. It's not something that I would have ever told Jensen," I pleaded, following her down the street as she slowly reversed, not daring to turn her back. "I'm Bethany." "Grab her! Jensen!" Jake yelled from the distance, Liam already moving to obey. "You have to believe me, Frankie," I said, my voice strained. "Why would I lie? There's something wrong with you," she panted. "Somebody, help me!" I made a wish. "Frankie," I said, the words tumbling out, desperate. I wished to leave my body, and I entered his. He entered mine. Matt killed Jensen, not me. The truth, unvarnished and unbelievable. "Stop it," Frankie wailed. "Just leave me alone. Somebody, please." "You said the butterfly must have had babies in your stomach because that was the way Gary Hurt made you feel," I said, pushing the final, intimate detail, the one that broke through the fear and denial. Why would I know that if I were Jensen? Why would I have ever told him that story? It's me. I'm Bethany. Frankie stopped walking. Finally, her eyes, wide and terrified, locked onto mine. I saw the processing happening behind them, the impossible truth clicking into place, the shared secret, the profound intimacy, something no one else could possibly know, something Jensen would never have been privy to, no matter how much he tortured her. She looked at me, really looked at me, and in Jensen's face, she saw something she'd never seen before. Emotion, raw, terrifying, desperate emotion. "That's why we came here," I continued, hearing the grunts of Jake and Liam behind me, getting closer. "You must know what caused this, Frankie? How I ended up in his body." "Why would I know anything about this?" she asked, her voice a thin thread of disbelief. "I don't know what's happening. Is this even real? I'm having a psychotic break." "I saw something, Frankie. It came to me in a hood, offered a way to escape my death. I just had to want it, and he granted that wish in the most awful way," I said, the words a bitter confession. The entity, the thing that had pulled me into its orbit, that had twisted these lives into a new, horrific knot. "I told him," Matt interrupted. Suddenly behind me, a hand clamped roughly on my shoulder, his voice raspy. He must have regained consciousness. "Told him we shouldn't help you. You're a wimp, Jensen, and you're weak. You were really going to save this bitch over us, huh? We did this for you, but I'm not going to prison for you. I didn't even want to be here." I turned to face him, holding up my hands defensively. "Matt, I'm sorry for hitting you. Just let her go and we'll—" My words were halted by two firm hands roughly grasping my throat. "Liam." The world spun. The night's loop was complete, like some terrifying cosmic punchline. I was back at the start, feeling the life squeeze out of my soul, the crushing pressure on my windpipe, the black spots dancing at the edge of my vision. Why had I been forced to suffer? Why had the unholy being, that cloaked monstrosity, not simply let my nightmare end on that road beneath Jensen's boot? Why had it dragged me into this deeper hell? My struggle was futile. My strength, Jensen's strength, was useless when two men held me down. The clunk of something heavy against flesh and bone brought me back to agonizing life. Frankie. She had bludgeoned Matt's head with a rock, a jagged piece of the very ground we fought on, plucked from the grass beside the road. His body crumpled to the tarmac, lifeless. The grip on my throat released, and I gulped in air, my lungs burning. "I don't know what I believe," Frankie whimpered, her eyes darting fearfully to Jake and Liam, who were now racing into the street. "How do I fix this?" I wailed, the question torn from my raw throat. She shook her head, eyes growing distant, lost in some terrifying memory. "I had a friend who told me about—" "No, it isn't that." "What?" I cried, backing away from the two approaching men. "Tell me." "It likes to watch people suffer," Frankie whispered, her voice barely audible, a fragile thread in the encroaching chaos. "It saves those at death's door, but always at a cost." "What is it?" I asked, desperation clawing at my throat. "What have you done?" Jake yelled, racing forwards and pushing Frankie to the ground. "Liam, no!" I begged. "Just let her tell me what—" "You've let her hit Matt," Liam interrupted, shaking his head disapprovingly as he approached Frankie's shaking form on the gravel. "Jake," I began. My voice choked. "This is all a mess." Jensen's friend sighed. as if lamenting a spilled drink rather than a brutal murder. What happened next was neither mercy nor torture. It was simply quick. So horrifyingly quick that my scream, the true gut-wrenching scream of absolute horror, was a second after it was over. Jake crouched beside Frankie, who was shuffling backward on her elbows, tears streaming down her face, and without even a hint of fury, the man cleanly thrust his arm forwards. His concealed blade pierced Frankie's skull so swiftly that she perished with a gulp of horror perpetually stuck on her lifeless face. The utter chilling lack of emotion on Jake's face. The casualness of murder. It was worse than any monster. I screamed and turned on my heel. The world blurred. My worn leather jacket flapped behind me like a broken wing. "Stop him!" Jake yelled at Liam, who was standing with a gormless expression on his face. But Liam was not as fast as Matt, not as strong, not as smart, which was saying something. I ran, my legs pumped, burning, carrying me away from the screams, from the blood, from the unbearable, crushing weight of what I had just witnessed. I never looked back. I never contacted the authorities. What would I even say? I saw a body swap and then a murder, and the killer was a man wearing the victim's body who was killed by his friends, one of whom I then knocked out, and then they murdered the witness who knew me, the one in Jensen's body, who used to be Bethany. No, they'd lock me up and throw away the key. Or worse, they'd send me to a padded cell where I could tell my stories to the empty air. I ran, and I kept running, to a distant town, then a distant city, then a distant country. The truck was abandoned somewhere along the way. Another casualty. I took on odd jobs, anything to keep moving, to stay anonymous. Truck driver, warehouse night shift, security guard, the usual. Just Leo Vance, another ghost in the machine of late-stage capitalism, perpetually moving, perpetually looking over my shoulder. My old wristwatch, a comforting weight, became more of a nervous tick than ever. Despite extensive research, late nights spent hunched over library computers, furtively scanning old texts and forgotten folklore, I haven't been able to find anything about the thing of which Frankie spoke. The hooded entity, the wish granter. But I know it was real. Not only due to the indelible, horrific images seared into my mind, the memory of Frankie's last, silent scream, but due to the shadows. Shadows at the edge of my vision, which forever pirouette out of view when I try to focus on them. I know that hooded thing follows me. It relishes in my torture, the constant, gnawing fear, the knowledge that I was forced to witness such a profound perversion of identity and justice, a hellish existence which never wanes, never ends. I am not trapped in Jensen's body, but I am trapped in the aftermath, trapped by the memory of the man who died before my eyes, wearing Bethany's body as some ghastly outfit. He finally saw the world through her eyes, if only for a moment. He experienced the sheer vulnerability and terror she must have lived with every day. I always wanted him to understand her pain, to grasp the empathy that was so alien to him. But I wonder whether he would ever have truly understood. Empathy and understanding are two sides of a coin. I longed for the former for Bethany, but he settled for the latter, as Jensen was not capable of compassion. Even for the one he claimed to love, and his power, the shadow of his monstrosity persists. I helped Bethany escape him, but I still suffer, for I've lost a piece of myself out there on that road, a piece of my hope, my ability to believe in any kind of justice. No matter where I go, the phantom of that night will forever follow me, and I'll forever be running from the chilling truth that the worst monsters are not the ones cloaked in shadow, but the ones wearing the faces of men. Total characters, 9, 9, and 8, 7. The air was a blade, a living thing that sawed through my worn leather jacket, cutting bone deep. My breath plumed, thick and white, in the impossible cold of a fast food kitchen that hours ago had reeked of stale grease and lukewarm apathy. The digital thermostat, just inches from my face, screamed "Fortigruarm," but it might as well have read "Welcome to Hell." My eyes were locked on the polished stainless steel of the freezer door, not at my own reflection, but at hers. She stood directly behind me, a tattered dress hanging from a skeletal frame, her eyes cavernous voids that swallowed what little light remained. An icy tendril, impossibly long, brushed against my neck, a phantom touch that prickled every nerve ending, screaming against the instinct to turn, to flee. Her voice, and when it came, was a whisper of fractured glass and forgotten prayers, seeping into the marrow of my bones. "Why not look at me?" That voice, that impossible cold, was the culmination of a night that had begun with nothing but the promise of a mediocre paycheck and the usual quiet dread of another transient job in another forgotten town. I'd walked into that greasy mausoleum of a restaurant believing it would be just another shift. I was wrong. Another town, another nameless fast food joint. That was my life. Always on the move, always taking the late shifts, the ones nobody else wanted. They paid in cash, required minimal paperwork, and offered a blessed anonymity that I clung to like a drowning man to driftwood. Tonight it was a burger joint called Big Bite Burger, stuck on the desolate outskirts of what felt like a forgotten corner of existence. The locals, in their limited capacity for conversation, had whispered about its history. Not the food, never the food, but the ground it sat on. Sacred ground, they'd mumbled, eyes wide and bloodshot, or narrowed with suspicion. A site of old disappearances, strange rituals, things that went bump in the night and never came back. Whatever. My worn leather jacket had seen enough sacred ground to last a lifetime, most of it ending in something profane. I just needed the $20 an hour and the quiet solitude of working alone. The kind of quiet that usually meant you were invisible. That's how I liked it. But there was no quiet tonight. Not really. The air itself felt heavy, humid, pregnant with an unspoken tension that had nothing to do with the storm brewing outside. Its distant rumble still a low growl on the horizon. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed, a high-pitched whine that usually faded into background noise, but tonight grated on my nerves, amplifying every creak and groan of the aging building. And the smell. Oh God, the smell. Usually it was just the stale, comforting aroma of fried grease and cheap coffee. Tonight it was oppressive, cloying, thick with something metallic, something like old blood trying to hide beneath layers of burnt fat. I pulled at the collar of my jacket, a nervous habit, though the fabric was already loose around my neck. My hand instinctively went to my wrist, tracing the cold metal of my old analog watch. It wasn't even for time anymore, just a grounding mechanism, a small, mechanical certainty in a world that consistently pulled the rug out from under me. I told myself it was pre-shift jitters, the usual anxiety of another dead-end job, but the knot in my gut tightened, a familiar premonition that something was about to go sideways. It always did. The closing crew, a trio of tired-looking kids who moved with the grace of sleepwalkers, had finally shuffled out the back door, leaving me to the vast, echoing silence of the empty restaurant. I'd locked every door, double-checked the deadbolts, even peered through the blinds at the darkening parking lot. My checklist was simple enough. Wipe down the sticky tables, mop the greasy floors, take out the overflowing trash bins. Mundane, mind-numbing tasks, exactly what I craved. The rain had started, a soft, insistent drumming against the plate glass windows, creating a hypnotic rhythm that was almost lulling me into a false sense of security. Almost, because even through the drumming, I could hear it now, the faint, high-pitched hum that hadn't been there before, a subtle electrical current flowing through the very air. Then, from the manager's office, the printer burst to life, a sudden, jarring mechanical whir. It ripped through the stillness, a jagged blade of sound, and the green power light, visible through the office door's glass panel, flickered erratically, like a dying firefly. My heart slammed against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate for escape. A chill, cold and sharp as splintered ice, raced down my spine, rooting me to the spot by the soda fountain. My first rational thought was some automated test, a leftover print command from the day shift. But the sound, now accompanied by the soft rustle of paper feeding, felt oddly deliberate, like a summons. It wasn't just printing, it was calling to me. Every instinct, finely honed by years of running from things that shouldn't exist, screamed at me to turn, to grab my go-bag from the break room, always packed, always by the door, and bolt. But that other, less rational part, that persistent, regrettable sense of responsibility that had dragged me into more holes than I could count, compelled me forward. My fatal flaw, the reason I never quite escaped. I moved cautiously, each step a conscious effort, my worn boots squeaking faintly on the linoleum. The dim glow of the computer monitor bathed the cramped office in a sickly green light, making the shadows writhe and dance. It amplified the tension, turning the mundane space into a theatrical stage for something unseen. On the printer tray, stark against the beige plastic, lay a freshly printed sheet of standard white paper. The ink, still warm to the touch, was a stark, ominous black. It wasn't a daily report, or a schedule, or a supply order. The header, bold and centered, screamed its title, "Rules for the Night Shift." I picked it up, my fingers brushing against the still damp ink. The paper felt heavier than it should, charged with a strange energy. My eyes, accustomed to scanning for threats, devoured the text. If you hear knocking on doors or windows, turn off all lights and hide. If the temperature drops suddenly, don't look behind you. If the office lights flicker, cover the window and stand still for 30 seconds. If you hear sobbing from the bathroom, don't enter. If you see a woman across the street, don't look away until you hear a knock behind you. Do not answer the phone, ever. The rules lie. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead, tracing a path down my temple. My hands, despite my efforts, began to tremble. Each line, with its chillingly specific instructions, seemed to tighten an invisible vice around my chest, making it harder to pull in a breath. My stomach churned, a volatile mix of nausea and dread, as the bizarre instructions painted vivid, horrifying images in my mind. The feeling of being watched, a palpable weight on my back, crept over me. I couldn't shake the sense that something sinister was already here, already lurking in the shadows, just waiting for me to slip up, to make a mistake. I let out a short, nervous laugh, a dry, humorless sound that felt alien in the silence. "Nice try, kids," I muttered, trying to mask the sudden, sharp spike of fear. Very funny, prank of the year. But the specificity, the sheer audacity of it, unsettled me deeply. Who would go to such lengths for a practical joke? And why? I tossed the paper back onto the desk, watching it flutter down like a dead leaf. All right, I grumbled, more to myself than to the empty room. Point taken. Now back to wiping down tables. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing pulse. But as I stepped out of the office, the air hit me like a physical blow. The sudden, drastic drop in temperature stole my breath. It wasn't a gradual chill, it was an instantaneous plummet, as if the very air had been sucked out of the room and replaced with something pulled from the deepest parts of a winter grave. My breath plumed in front of me, thick and white, just as it had in the hook, confirming the impossible cold. I glanced instinctively at the digital thermostat on the wall near the kitchen entrance. It wasn't just cold, it read a horrifying, impossible 4 degrees. A rule slammed into my mind, fresh off the printer. If the temperature drops suddenly, don't look behind you. Every fiber of my being screamed that command. Don't look, don't turn around, just walk away. Get out, run! But the world-weary fatalism that clung to me like a second skin warred with the primal urge to flee. I was already in it. I knew it. The game had begun, and deep down, somewhere buried under layers of cynicism and self-preservation, that damned, reluctant conscience whispered, "You have to know. You have to see." I felt a strange, irresistible compulsion, a pull stronger than any fear. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, I turned, and that's when I saw her reflection. The polished stainless steel of the freezer door, reflecting the dim lights of the kitchen, showed me not just my own gaunt, terrified face, but the figure standing directly behind me. A woman. Her dress, what was left of it, was tattered and hung in damp shreds. Her hair, long and lank, was plastered to a face that was more skull than flesh. Her eyes were gone, replaced by cavernous, lightless voids that seemed to suck the very hope out of the air. Her mouth was a gaping maw, stretched impossibly wide in a silent scream, and an icy tendril, impossibly long and translucent, reached out, brushing against the back of my neck. It was a phantom touch, but I felt it, every single nerve ending shrieking in protest. My mind screamed not to turn, not to acknowledge her, to keep my back to her reflection and bolt. But I was frozen, rooted in place, my gaze locked on her in the metallic surface. Then her voice came. It wasn't loud, not a shout or a scream. It was a whisper, a sound composed of fractured glass and forgotten prayers, seeping into the marrow of my bones. "Why not look at me?" My body, already rigid with terror, locked up even further. Every muscle screamed, every nerve ending vibrated, begging for movement, for flight. But fear, absolute and suffocating, had rooted me to the spot. My breath hitched in my throat. I could feel her presence, the impossible cold radiating from her, even though she was only a reflection. The tendril still brushed my neck, a feather-light caress that promised unimaginable horrors. I could feel the cold seeping into my very core, a bone-deep chill that threatened to shatter my teeth. The smell of something ancient and moldering, mixed with the ever-present grease, filled my nostrils. I forced myself to back away, one excruciatingly slow step at a time, my eyes still locked on the reflection, until I was several feet from the freezer door. Only then, with a choked gasp, did I finally force myself to spin around. Nothing. The kitchen was empty. The air was still icy, swirling around me like a hungry ghost. But the figure was gone. My heart pounded, a frantic drum solo in my chest, threatening to burst through my ribs. My head spun, trying to reconcile what I had seen with the empty space before me. Had it been a hallucination? The stress? No. The cold was real. The terror was real. I stumbled back into the manager's office, my hand grabbing the printer, clutching the crumpled list of rules like a lifeline. If this wasn't some elaborate, incredibly cruel prank, then maybe I needed to take it seriously. Maybe these were not rules to be broken, but a chilling instruction manual for survival. The night spiraled into an accelerated nightmare. The old crackling PA system, normally used for announcing order numbers, came to life with a sudden burst of static that made me jump. Then, a melody, a haunting lullaby, its tune eerily warped, like a child's music box left out in the rain, notes dripping with water and decay. Each note was off-kilter, slightly dissonant, as though mocking the innocence it was supposed to convey. It was faintly familiar, dragging up a forgotten scrap of memory from a childhood I barely remembered. Something warm and safe, now twisted into something venomous. The longer it played, the more it sounded like whispers hidden beneath the music, barely audible but impossible to ignore. My skin prickled, and I felt as if the lullaby was pulling me into its sinister rhythm, daring me to stay and listen. The soft, childlike melody, now laced with an adult's scream, sent shivers down my spine. My mind raced. If you hear knocking on doors or windows, turn off all lights and hide. No knocking yet, but a lullaby that felt like a prelude to one. I didn't waste another second. I bolted, stumbling slightly on the slick kitchen floor, into the walk-in freezer. The heavy door clanged shut behind me, plunging me into frigid, absolute darkness. I huddled amid stacks of frozen burger patties and lukewarm soda syrup, trembling, my breath misting around me. The freezer's hum was a cold comfort, a barrier against the things that now inhabited the restaurant. Then the knocking started, a rhythmic, insistent thump, thump, thump against the windows of the dining area, growing steadily in intensity. Not just tapping, but deep, resonant impacts that vibrated through the very foundation of the building. Shadows, long and distorted, moved past the frost-covered glass of the freezer's small, circular window. I could hear faint whispers now, carried on the air, begging me, enticing me, to come out, to look. My wristwatch, a useless hunk of metal in the dark, felt cold against my clammy wrist. I twisted the crown, a pointless gesture, trying to find some anchor in the rising tide of panic, when the knocking finally subsided, replaced by a tense, waiting silence. I forced myself to crack open the freezer door. A sliver of light from the dining area spilled in, revealing the ghostly white of my own breath. I slowly pushed the door wider, peering out. The dining area was filled, not with customers, not with people, with figures, pale, translucent, their empty eye sockets locked onto me with an unnerving, palpable intensity. They pressed against the windows, a silent, macabre audience, grinning with impossibly wide mouths that stretched far beyond human capacity. Their forms shimmered, like heat haze off asphalt, distorting the world behind them. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and something rotten. Another rule came flooding back into my mind, sharp and clear. Hide under the counter. My legs felt like lead, but I forced them to move. I scrambled under the main service counter, squeezing myself into the cramped space, clutching the crumpled rules list as though it were a crucifix. Outside, the figures grew more frantic, their pale hands slamming against the glass with increasing intensity. The sound was a relentless, bone-jarring rhythm that reverberated through the empty store, each strike seeming to shake the glass to its breaking point. Hairline cracks began to spread across the immense plate glass, catching the flickering light and creating an ominous, spiderweb-like pattern. The sight of the fractured glass, combined with the relentless pounding, made it feel like the figures were moments away from bursting through, from reaching me, and one by one, the lights in the store, already buzzing and flickering, began to die, plunging the room into deeper, oppressive darkness. My breath came in shallow, ragged gasps, each one a desperate attempt to pull in enough air. The cacophony of bangs and whispers was a terrifying symphony of despair. The lullaby, which had been playing faintly in the background, abruptly stopped. The pounding on the windows ceased. An eerie, absolute silence descended, heavier and more profound than any silence I had ever known. It pressed in, suffocating, as if the very air was holding its breath. I peeked out from under the counter, my eyes scanning the room, straining to see through the gloom, searching for any sign of movement. The figures were gone, but the oppressive atmosphere remained. The restaurant felt alive, a predatory beast holding its breath, waiting for me to make a mistake, to emerge from my flimsy hiding spot. My hand was still clutching the rule list. My thumb brushed over the last, chilling line. The rules lie. What did that mean? Were they all a trick? Was I playing right into something's hands? Suddenly, the phone on the counter, the old, greasy landline that hadn't rung all night, let out a piercing, startling trill. The sharp sound made me jump, my head hitting the underside of the counter with a dull thud. My blood ran cold. Do not answer the phone, ever. The rule was clear, but that damnable, reluctant conscience, coupled with a desperate need for answers, for any explanation, warred with my survival instinct. I hesitated, my hand trembling as it hovered over the receiver. Why did they print that rule if it was so important? What if it wasn't one of the them? What if it was the person who put those rules there? Against my better judgment, I reached out, my fingers closing around the cold plastic of the receiver. I lifted it to my ear. Hello? My voice was a choked whisper. A familiar voice spoke on the other end. Not familiar like a friend, but familiar like a ghost you've met before, haunting the edges of your perception. It was calm, steady, and utterly devoid of emotion. It's not over. Leo, you need to leave. Now. My heart seized. They knew my name. Who is this? I demanded, desperation clawing at my throat. What's happening? What are these rules? Who are you? But the line went dead, replaced by a harsh, hollow dial tone. The temperature dropped again, a sudden plunge back into the Arctic chill, making my teeth chatter. And then I felt it, a palpable presence, cold and ancient, directly behind me, even though I was still crouched under the counter. My skin crawled and a cold, clammy hand, heavy and skeletal, brushed against my shoulder. I spun around, my head snapping up, but there was nothing there. Just the suffocating darkness, the lingering cold, and the echoing dial tone of a phone I should never have answered. What felt like hours passed. I remained huddled under the counter, my old watch useless in the blackness, no longer caring about the time. Eventually, the cold began to recede. The oppressive atmosphere slowly lifted. The silence returned, but this time, it felt genuinely empty. The horrors had receded, at least for now, when the owner, a nervous wreck of a man named Frank, found me crouched under the counter at dawn. He was pale, his eyes wide and bloodshot. I rambled incoherent words spilling out about the rules, the figures, the cold. He listened, shaking his head slowly, and muttered something about stress, about me hallucinating. But then I asked him about the rules paper, the one I'd left on his office desk. His face drained of all color. You saw it too? He whispered, his voice barely audible. His reaction confirmed my worst fears, solidifying the sickening truth. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't stress. Something was profoundly wrong with this place, something beyond my understanding, something that had marked not just me, but perhaps Frank, too. The chill returned then, a subtle, creeping cold that slithered beneath my skin. I quit the next morning, walking away from the job and its horrors without looking back. My go bag was already packed. It always was. But the memory lingers, an unshakable shadow that follows me, a constant companion. My nights are haunted by shadows creeping at the edge of my vision and whispers that tickle my ears, refusing to let me rest. Sometimes, when the temperature drops unexpectedly, a suffocating cold grips my chest, and I swear I can hear her voice echoing softly in the silence, a taunt and a plea. Why not look at me? The sound sends shivers down my spine, leaving me questioning my sanity, wondering if the line between what's real and what's not has been permanently blurred. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I catch myself reaching for my phone, my hand trembling as I hesitate to dial. A strange mix of dread and longing wells up in my chest, the need for closure clashing with the fear of what I might find. I want answers. I want to know who that voice belonged to, what that last rule meant, but then I remember, the last rule, the rules lie. The weight of those words settles heavily on me, reminding me that even the comfort of answers may be an illusion, another trap waiting to be sprung. Character count 9965.